Let's resume 2020-21 Yamhill County Budget Committee.
Typically, in prior years, what we would do at this point, because we don't have any presentations scheduled for today, it's just strictly for deliberations on the requests that have come forward over the last several days. In the past, we've typically just gone straight into the recommendations brought forward from the compensation committee. So at this point, the chair of the compensation committee, Lindsay, can go ahead and we've typically gone through it one by one in deliberation, and then you can do motion as the committee can adopt or consider the request.
Okay.
All right. Lindsay.
So the compensation committee makes the recommendation for the treasurer that the compensation levels remain the same as 1920.
Any discussion or motion?
I move that we approve the compensation treasurer salary, treasurer compensation plan.
Second. Any comments? All in favor of keeping the treasurer flat or as it is? Aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Passes unanimously.
Okay, the next recommendation from the budget committee is regarding the sheriff. The recommendation is to have instruct staff to comply with the statutory requirements of the compensation levels, not to exceed 8.5% increase.
Second. Any comments? All in favor of complying with the statutory requirements of no more than 8% for the sheriff? Signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed? All right, passed unanimously.
The next recommendation from the budget committee is regarding the district attorney. We recommend that the stipend that the county gives the district attorney's office be increased by a total of $6,000.
So moved.
Second. Any discussion? All right. All in favor of recommending the stipend to increase for the district attorney to increase $6,000? Signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Pass unanimously.
The next recommendation from the budget committee is that the county clerk's compensation remain the same as 1920 budget levels with 0% increase.
I would move approval of the compensation committee's recommendation.
Second.
Any discussion? All in favor of keeping the clerk's compensation flat or as 2020? Signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Pass unanimously.
The budget committee recommends that regarding the county assessor, that the compensation levels remain the same as the 1920 budget with a 0% increase.
So moved.
Second.
Any discussion? All right, all in favor of keeping the assessor at the 2020 level with 0 increase, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Unanimously.
And the final recommendation is regarding the commissioner's compensation. The committee recommends a 0% increase to all commissioner compensation levels from 1920 budget.
I would move approval of the recommendation.
I'll second.
Any discussion?
I just thank the compensation committee. Being out in the audience, I appreciate listening to all of you discuss the components of that and to the county taxpayers. I'm very grateful for the compensation. So thanks to all of you.
All right, all in favor of a 0 increase to the county commissioners' compensation, signify by saying
Aye.
Aye.
any opposed? All right, pass unanimously. All right, Ken. What is
Is that all the compensation?
that? Is all
Yes.
the competition.
Thank you for your service, everybody, on that. You know, it says budget committee, but really it's budget committee and when you get hired for this, you know.
My apologies, we're distracted because it seems like we were having some feedback through the audio that was also some technical issues that we were. So at this point with deliberations, I have a handout
Great, thank you, Ken.
that just summarizes,
Thank you, Carrie.
Thank you.
Thank you.
so. One second. So what we have, and you'll see on the request, so all right, one modification I need to make to the list that I just handed out, that top one, there's a general fund request for HHS. We ended up, Lindsay did not make that request, so that should not be on the list.
Okay, I didn't see it in the budget, so I'm glad that,
So
that was my first question.
I apologize for that. It was something that Lindsay and I were discussing.
Since Director Manfred's on the line, hey, thanks for letting us cross something off.
So what we have is the upper part is a list of through the presentations or discussions that were being had during the presentations. Some of these are specific requests that were brought forward during their presentation. Others, like the first two, we had just general discussions during, the video lottery. So I put fairgrounds and parks on here for discussion. And then there's some other items down at the bottom that came up during discussions on that first list. And I thought it might be easier to get through the departmental items first and before we get into the community requests and personnel requests. And I'm not sure how best we want to do this. I believe it's up to the chair and up to the committee if you want to go line by line. But essentially, the same thing as if there's interest to approve it, then we need a motion and then discussion and then action taken on it. To approve or not approve is essentially, or you can modify what's being approved.
So I understand these numbers are already built into those budgets we've looked at, correct?
Correct.
So if we deny them, then there's just a modification to their budget to,
If the economic development funds that are going to parks and fairgrounds, let's just say if it was denied and not to do it, we would have to make a modification to Fund 26 to reflect that those funds are not being transferred out of that fund. It would remain in 26. And then I would have to go back and work with the individual departments, parks and fairgrounds. They would have to adjust their expenses with the absence of that bill.
okay. But the general fund, it would just be a revision of all of their budgets. Are you understanding that? Gabe?
This would, if this wasn't approved, if it's approved, because we typically put this on here for discussion. If this is approved, there would be no further changes. It's already built into the proposed budget. If there's any modification to the amounts, or if there's a decision not to move economic development funds to these two divisions, then I would have to make adjustments to those three funds.
Well, I think we should go through them individually and just, I'd love to hear the input.
Yeah.
I guess what I struggle with with this exercise is that I don't know what I'm comparing it next to. I mean, I know in my business what I've got, and if my costs are increasing, I know where I'm pulling from. And I guess it's just not, it's kind of muddy for me. And so a general statement of, has our revenue increased by 1.887 to the point where,
Okay, you're talking about the total. I'm sorry.
Yeah, I
was focused in on the first two because I thought we were going 20 by 20.
Right.
So,
yeah.
Well, I'm with Lindsay on that. Like, I don't know. I don't have anything this money at the bottom, what is that money? Is that money just extra revenue that came in and that's the intent is to go to these
Oh, I see
places?
what you mean.
Or is it,
Right.
or is
Yeah.
it pulling from reserves?
What
that
bank
we
account are we
may or
getting?
may not
okay,
have?
I tell you what, why don't we take one step back? And I want to make sure that it didn't print correctly. Okay. You're missing a field. So I'm going to quickly send this to Carrie. I'm going to reprint this. And to make sure that because you're right, what you're missing is some fields that,
Last year, I think, and you may recall this, that there was here's where we have
Yeah.
some funds available that are
Yeah.
unallocated in these different funds.
Yes.
Do you remember that too?
I do.
Okay.
and it's.
In addition to the total requests versus departmental and community requests.
Right.
I'm in the process of printing it, the printed version.
Can we do a 5-minute break while we wait for those?
Actually, in the interest, what I'll do, while we have these copies coming over, I'm gonna jump up on because we won't be able to see them, but I'm gonna use the TV screen.
Oh, perfect. I was
Jenny's
gonna say that I
asking
got
for a
some
break.
notes, too.
Oh, you want
Danny.
a break?
We could take,
That's up to you.
yeah, let's take a 5-minute break.
Yeah, the compensation committee.
Yeah, we did. We got to move
I was like,
around.
what
and-
are
Oh, ready to go.
Why do you
I
guys
have
need
my
a
We need a
break?
break. We just had one for
And
like
microphones are still on.
20 minutes.
I think the compensation committee should sit through this.
Who's the Seahawk fan?
Share.
Sure.
Oh, sure.
Oh,
He is.
He is the 12th man.
Yes, he is. And 13.
Yeah, the second.
Easy there.
Ah,
It's all right, Tim.
Hello, Sheriff.
I might as well, I can put up with you. I put up with my wife about the Seahawks.
how about them Cardinals,
Go Buccaneers.
Sheriff?
I'm torn between Cardinals and Seahawks. I've lived in both states.
So you know what I did? Do you remember that? Do you remember that dirty trick?
And he wouldn't admit to it if he did remember.
The no sounds like he does remember.
His face is
We had
turning,
a-
his face is turning around.
Are
We
we
had
off?
a Cardinals
No.
rug, big Cardinals rug in the garage.
Yes, I fully remember.
So
Funny.
Brian, I said, I need to get this into the sheriff's
Yeah.
office, but I
Careful
don't
what you
want
say.
him to know it's me.
Always,
So Brian
actually.
rolled it up.
You broke your
And he said,
glasses.
Yes, that's
"You should
wonderful.
say
Yeah,
walking
right.
Oh,
when you
good
were on the
timing.
camera
Good
door."
timing.
Yeah.
He knew whenever they
They'll
were
put it
all
up
in the
on the
basement.
Yes,
about
actually.
leaving.
Yeah, if it's
And
up
he
there.
had it like this big giant rug, and he's trying to get past all the cameras and puts it in Tim's office. And it's this giant Cardinals rug, and nobody would fess up to it. Nobody was admitting where it came from. Oh.
Never mind. It was an idea. It was a bad one.
But it was an idea, Joe.
It was an idea, but it was a bad one.
Wasn't there a proposal to bring, was it baseball to Portland?
Major League PDX.
Major
League.
MLB PDX. I am the promoter of it coming to the river, but
Yep, right on the water.
Right, at the mill.
Or was it?
Can you imagine the visual landscape if you had the bleachers, the stadium seats, and then you look over the
Well, that's what it's
edge
supposed
of the
to-
river and then out into Marion County?
Well, the one
That'd be
that,
pretty
Over the
beautiful.
river.
Or Chehalis Mountains, you could turn
yeah, they
it.
wanted the one they
So
wanted
you'll
to
be
put
the
in
shade.
on the river in northwest Portland. It was great because it's kind of like what you said, stands, and you kind of it's set up a little bit. You overlook the river,
Mhm.
and then on the other side behind the river, you saw the bluff.
Oh,
You know,
yeah?
and that's it. So it's pretty nice.
It's big ideas. That's what that is.
Well, what's fair now?
We wouldn't know where to put all the people though. We don't have enough
That's right.
hotels and.
So where's your city?
But yeah, the
Are you
bypass
into
goes right.
Hillsborough Hospital.
No,
That's
but
pretty fun.
I used to, when we were kids, we would go to, what were they? When it was the Portland team was at, what's now the Timbers.
Oh, okay.
So it used to just be a baseball stadium, and that was really fun. I think it was the Portland Beavers.
The hops are, I always forget the classification. They're like not made minor league? Are they
Oh,
technically
yeah,
minor
yeah,
league?
yeah, right.
No, no, the heating.
Okay. Thank you, Ken.
The heating quite
How long did it take them to recover from
And Ken, there was a request to put it up on the screen too, if that works. I'm not sure if you can do that.
I'll figure out.
Okay.
Hope we can do that.
Rick's glasses just broke, that's all. His reading glasses.
Just trying to grab right here.
for this. Denny. It's a joke.
Actually, come home someday, there's a big Seahawk medal inside his house.
Oh, that was so funny. He had no idea where it came from.
Nobody fess up.
What happened?
Oh, we had a Cardinals rug in our garage, so I knew how Tim was about the Seahawks, so brought it in, gave it to Brian Young, our emergency manager. He snuck it into Tim's office and put this rug down. And nobody would bet. Brian said he had to sneak past all the security cameras so that nobody would see, because he knew where they all were.
Yeah.
And he waited till they were all down in the basement having a meeting.
What do you say about Mary's and Ron's dedication to the Cardinals when they do the run in the garage?
Well, I bought it for my husband for something. I had to ask his friend, okay, what team does he like? I had no idea.
Well, I'm sure he's not watching, so I can tell you that I have a friend that is a huge OSU fan, which I am too. Actually, I like all the teams in Oregon. I didn't go to any school, so I can't. I probably root for the Beavers more than the Ducks. But I got this package of Oregon Duck stickers, and I would put one on the back of his truck, and he would drive around all the time, and then we're sitting there one day, and he starts telling me this story. He needs to catch the person who's putting the stickers on his truck. It's all of his workers, and everybody's getting on it. I said,
Did he
"Man,
ever find out?
No. But I did run out of stickers. And I had to buy any more.
You know, you're broadcasting this live.
He's not.
He said that his friend's probably not listening.
Yeah.
We can send him the case.
We can.
He's
That's
not.
right.
Are we good to go? All right. Let's call back to order. 2000.
First, let me apologize because it seems like things had a lot of things going. And obviously, I'm having some technical issues because the spreadsheet that I just gave you is missing a couple items that I added this morning, but I'll just restate those
Okay.
when we get to them.
That sounds good.
And apologize for that. So let's go over the spreadsheet, and I'm gonna try to broadcast on the, to put it up on the screens, but due to the size of this, I don't know if it's really gonna broadcast very well. And maybe we can put it on one of the screens. Is that possible?
Yeah, the one
Are
facing
you
back.
able to see it? Wait, John, are you able to see
Have we
it?
technically
Yeah.
reconvened?
Okay.
Yes.
Well, maybe we
Okay.
don't need to. I just asked him.
Okay, then. And then change the Yeah, see, I don't know if this is,
It sounds like everybody can see it
Yeah.
on their printouts again.
okay. I don't know if it's, maybe just really quick, I'll just run through
Sure.
this really
Okay.
quick. It might be easier for me to explain the columns and the layout of this.
Mhm.
And then we'll take it off the big screen. So what you're gonna have is we have several different, the first column, these 1 through 9, and I actually have 3 more items to add for discussion to this list. These are departmental requests. These are requests that have come forward. Most of them are general fund requests, except for the first 2, which are, it's just there for discussion on whether or not the committee wants to continue with the same level of contribution to that involvement on the proposed paragraphs. So these are just internal department requests. And you'll see we have the request and then the requested amount. I highlighted the ones that are highlighted in yellow on the screen, but it's grayed out on your printout. All of those are already built into this budget. In order to balance the budget, present a balanced budget, instead of going back into the departments and making the cuts necessary to balance, we went ahead and balanced to 1002. But subject, like I said, subject to approval here. And just to kind of clarify, it is a shortfall. There's expenses are exceeding the revenues that are coming into those individual departments, so they are, in fact, short. Just because it's discretionary that's moving into there, it is a revenue source, and so those funds are out of balance. And so you'll see what the general fund request is, and if you scroll down, or if you look down at the bottom, you'll see a total of what that request is. And that's to just track what the requests are. Right now, it's at 1.3 million in total requests. That's just the department. Plus the 2,000 once we get down to the community requests, because that is historically been general fund that's coming in there. So you have the columns, what's been requested, and then I'll be taking notes on what action is taken, approved, not approved, reduced, and whatever that is. As you keep going to the right, I'll enter in the approved amount. And then you'll see several columns. You'll see GF for general fund, landfill reserve, that's the landfill license reserve, ONC reserve, video lottery, or contingency. And the reason we have those columns is these are all discretionary revenues, and this really more comes into play with the community requests. We typically don't use these funds outside of one-time projects in a department. We don't use it for general operating. All the requests that we have coming forward from the departments are all general operating requests. So those are all general fund requests. When at the bottom of each of those columns, you're going to see an amount. As an example, under general fund, right now I have a number there that is $3,022,750. So as an example, if a project,
You put something in that column.
if I put something in there, it's going to reduce. And what that's doing is that's going to reduce what is budgeted to the reserve for the future in 1002, the general fund budget. So if none of these, right now, that number is going to look different than what you're seeing at 1002, because like I said, in order to balance everything that's grayed out for the department, those were already factored into 1002. So for the purposes of deliberations of this worksheet, I backed those out, and that $3 million number reflects those numbers are not in there. So once we start putting that in there, you'll start to see the change. Because right now we have a total of, just for department requests, of 1,328,163. So if all of those are approved, it's going to reduce that 3 million that we have in 1002.
For my sake, would it be possible for you to go over these reserves and their intended purposes? Because I'm not sure, like this last one, the 500,000 reserve, is that intended for what in terms of contingency? Is that the insurance? Or is that something else?
That contingency is our general fund contingency.
Okay.
And so what is a little bit different here is
Page 136.
we have an allocation that's going to that fund for a contingency. And what we're saying, if we think that contingency can be less, and we want to have funds from the general fund go into that, and then we would budget less for that contingency.
So it's page 136. If you, it helps for me at least to look at it. Yeah, it's just nice to know what it is.
I just want to know what fund I'm borrowing from or taking from.
Right.
So it's
Yeah.
accurate to say that we have a little over $3 million in our general fund reserve. And just the needed backfills from 1920 in terms of personnel costs are over, they're 1.3 million. So
I
we're,
wouldn't say that they're all personnel costs, because it could be, it's a combination. I think the sheriff's office has attributed most of his request to personnel. The,
Right. Assessor.
But the assessor is a combination of personnel as well as software licensing, and then also maintaining funds for the aerial flyover. I mean, there's a combination. So I wouldn't say that it's all 100% personnel.
Okay. But what about the new requests that are below for new FTE?
The administration, that is that's a personnel, that's for adding an additional.
Okay.
That's the difference of what we need for administration to support that position. That's the additional fund. It doesn't pay for the full position. We already have funds within the budget this is just an additional amount. And then the county council, that's for professional services, not for direct personnel costs.
Okay.
You know, so I want to make sure that, so the general fund is discretionary. Landfill license reserve, that is a discretionary fund. Those are funds that the board has pulled from the licensing agreement for Riverbend and held in a reserve and used for one-time projects or grant requests or things like that. ONC reserve, that's another one where historically we've gotten more funds. We get a little bit of money that comes into that each year. We use that for one-time projects. There's no restrictions on what we use. It's just historically we've only used that for one-time projects because it's not sustainable. We don't have a constant steady stream of revenue that's coming in there that we could use it to sustain operations. Video lottery is, the restriction with that is it's economic development. You know, we use it for economic development. Now that can be, you know, like parks and fairgrounds, they do their justification that's presented during the budget process. It's in your binder where they draw the connection on what they're using the funds and the direct economic impact that they have on that. And then the contingency, we just add that column because that's just one that if I have a recommendation that we have $500,000 in the general fund contingency, but also recognizing that if we need to reduce that because we want to maintain a larger reserve for the future in general fund, that's one of those that we can adjust that will lessen contingency to have a little bit more reserve, but recognizing that if we lock it up in a reserve, we can't touch it for next year, except for unless we adopt a supplemental budget later in the year.
Okay, thank you.
So that's what each of the columns, and then what you'll see down at the bottom is an estimate of what I have, what I think is available for each one. So the 3 million that's there, that's, you know, backing out the requests, you know, that's what I think is available, but keeping in mind that that's our reserve. That's our general fund reserve. So that's, you know, so if that 1.3 million is all applied there, whatever we have, the balance of that is what we're going to have available for the general fund reserve. And then landfill license reserve, we didn't use those funds at all last year. That was all held in a reserve for the future. That's why that balance looks really good. And so that's at 781,000. If we fund any one-time projects, it would just reduce that amount and we would move that into an expenditure line and it would reduce that ending balance. Same thing with ONC reserve. Most of the time we do budget the full amount to have expenditure authority for it. But right now, if it's elected on some, and a lot of this is more of the community request, if you want to use those funds for a community request, you could allocate that with budget and the grants awarded. And we'd still keep the balance available in an expenditure line for projects or requests that may come forward during the fiscal year. And then video lottery, that 290,000, this one is a tough one because that's based on what we have for revenues. And that could have an impact on grants. But there has been times in the past where we've had community requests came forward. There's a direct economic development benefit or impact for that project, and we may award that. I'm hesitant, and I'm going to recommend that we not necessarily do anything with those funds, and we keep any economic development requests to go through the grant program during the next fiscal year. So that's kind of a holdover. It's always been on here, and I left it on here.
A point of clarification about that, though, there are at least three current requests for that economic development fund. Isn't that correct?
Just the,
Yes, there's Parks, Fairgrounds, and
Yes.
Parkway.
right.
Okay.
But they're already built in.
They're already built in. Yeah.
So
Okay, that's a good point. Thank you for clarifying that.
they're already built in.
Perfect.
Two of them are there for discussion. The only one that's in addition is the Parkway committee request for the additional lobbyists. So that would be a $10,000 impact.
Yeah.
So, yes.
Question. So looking at the larger picture of our county, where's the rest of our savings? How are we looking?
Well, you're gonna have a combination. If you go back through without necessarily, if you go back to the original budget message, our reserves are not just in 1002, what's remaining. That each department has a certain amount of ending fund balance that also falls into those reserve amounts. We also have funds in the insurance reserve. And that's something that it didn't make it onto the printout, but that's a discussion I wanted to have. There are funds in the insurance reserve. However, there's a mix of dedicated and discretionary with that. So there's some limitations on what holes we can use to, what we can use to patch holes as they come up during the budget year.
Right.
So you'd have to look at, in total, kind of go back to the original budget message that I presented on Monday morning. And then the reserves that you see there is a combination of HHS had a pretty good, has some ending balance. Community corrections right now has an ending balance, but that is subject to change depending on intergovernmental revenue. So there are some funds out there that aren't necessarily going to get spent this year. And we have the 2.2 million for the PERS reserve. Most of those funds have been, those are discretionary. Those were not billed from debt. That's not a mix of dedicated funds. So you have 2.2 million in the insurance reserve for retirement reserve. That's another fund. So you do have some, you still have quite a bit of reserves. And then also keeping in mind of what the budget document, you remember some of the slides, departments they budget historically a little bit more than what they actually spend, because it's important that we make sure that we do have sufficient appropriation authority for the full year. And so there is some conservative spending practices in departments managing their funds. So there's a reserve that's also in there, but I'm very cautious with that because you get a pandemic or a crisis, or all of a sudden we're spending more all the way up to what we budgeted. So we do have funds available. There's very few departments that budgeted a zero ending balance. But the ones who did budget a zero ending balance, those are the ones that, we struggle at times, because that's where we have to rely on whatever funds that we hold in a reserve for the future and tentative contingency, and then the little bit of reserve funds, the funds that we have in insurance reserve. And it depends on each category.
Yeah.
I
So
know that was a very long answer.
Well, no, it's helpful because in general, before we dive into this, it's not just about our reserve funds, right? We have departments who are very heavily dependent on state funds, which could get whacked here by almost 10% coming up. We have ongoing roll-up costs, especially with the sheriff, that we have to fund, or you're talking about cutting real people and real jobs and real families. We have funds coming from the state that might get cut, and our governmental fees are down. So it's not just about our balances and, you know, are the ending balances at zero? It's some of these other departments are going to have to adjust as well. It's not just from the county. And I think, Rick, you said that when you look at our personnel costs, it's about 30% is benefits between medical and retirement. And in the typical private sector setting, it might be about 10, 15.
11, maybe, yeah.
So, you know, that's a concern going forward
Well, so based
as we
upon,
dive into this. Sorry, Glenn.
no, Chair. So based upon what I heard from each department, most of the departments are either have taken the forecasted reductions into account, or like in their actual budget numbers, or they're preparing for those budget reductions. So especially the primarily state funded ones. That's what I was hearing, which is interesting. I mean, it's interesting because it doesn't look like it, but that's what I heard from departments.
And I would go back one step, because I think the one thing, and I don't believe I addressed it during my budget message, the one thing that we did do for discretionary allocation for this year is we held departments flat.
Oh yeah.
There was no increase going into the budget process. We held them flat. There's been in years prior, we've done 1-2% increases to their discretionary allocation. So they could start building their budgets for anticipated increases. But one of the first steps that we did very early on in the process back in December is we held all discretionary allocation increases flat.
Just this table right here shows that.
Correct.
The big pulled out one.
So we held it flat, and departments had to build their budget with no increase in discretionary funds. And what you have before you are the departments that rely heavily on general fund monies. They're predominantly personnel driven, as far as their costs go and their expenditures. And what you see here is the ask where there's the need right now to backfill.
Yeah, I guess my point is that, I mean, if you just look at the sheriff, the allocation for patrol, and that's from last budget, that's a cost coming forward from last budget, correct? And he said that it's going to be the same this coming year. So when we do this again, we're going to have a larger number in front of us. And it's significant because that represents people, right? It's not, you know, we want to add another FTE that represents people. And if you look at the percentage of our general fund reserve, you know, it's significant. So I'm concerned going forward. We're seeing comparable districts and, you know, fire districts and cities that are the same size as Yamhill County in other states, California, that are slashing their budgets by 20-25% right now. So I hope that we keep that in mind as we discuss this.
I think that's a good point. Lindsay, one of the things that is a real concern of mine is, and we talked about, I think, either Monday or yesterday in our budget meetings, is the legality of the governor slashing some of the programs, whether they be HHS programs or criminal justice programs, by actually it's 17% for the biennium, so 8.5% for this year and 8.5% for the upcoming year. There's going to be, I think, a very big influx of counties, not necessarily us, but counties that are going to opt out of they qualify, they're going to opt out to give those programs back to the state, which doesn't benefit the counties, it doesn't benefit anybody, because I think at the county level, we can run the program much more efficiently than they can at the state level. But you're right, if that goes through, it's like that biennium decrease at 70%. Are they saying, since we're going to be in the second year, we only have to cut 8.5%, or if it's 17% for the biennium, we only have 1 year left in the biennium, do we have to cut 17%? And nobody seems to know the answers
Chair,
to that.
if I may, to address that, based upon what I understand, the money for community corrections, with the exception of the 224,000 for misdemeanor, that's a general fund. 90% of community corrections right now comes from the state. So cutting that or sending it back to the state does not change our budget at all here at the county. Because we're talking about the budget right now. We're not talking, that would be a dramatic change for a department.
Sure.
But we would still, I would still argue that we should be supervising misdemeanors. And so that means we have to stand up a whole new department just to supervise misdemeanors.
And without the state funding, I don't believe that Yamhill County citizens have the capability of standing up a whole, like misdemeanor enforcement.
Yeah.
We don't have that. I mean, you're talking about standing up a pretty big program.
Yeah. And I do want to also come back to the some jurisdictions or some taxing districts are reducing their budgets by 25%. We're talking about Yamhill County in Oregon, right? So we have unique property tax laws. We have unique funding models of how money comes through the state, from feds to the state to counties. I'm hearing from department heads who I feel like know the most about their budgets and how the funding comes in, that they've anticipated that 8.5% reduction already. And when I look at this, I came into the budget thinking, we're gonna need to be cutting. And then when I see what's actually here, I feel a lot more comfortable about it in seeing that there are places where if we need to go back to a supplemental budget because something gets cut by 50%, we still have that in our, in the both contingencies and reserves, both within the department and outside of the department. But I want to acknowledge that the community requests do make me nervous.
Yeah,
So-
no, I mean, at this point, I don't think anybody really knows for sure what's going to happen. Like you said, the governor, she's probably waiting for the forecast, but in general, people are very nervous right now. And we might have unique funding formulas as a county, but we do have a significant portion of our budget that comes from the state and intergovernmental and fees, and people are not, resuming normal activities at this point. So I'm just worried going forward. Government tends to experience a delay in this kind of stuff. So when all of our other cost drivers are shooting through the roof and there's so much uncertainty, I just want to be careful.
No, go ahead.
No, I really want to emphasize that, there is a lot of uncertainty right now with what actions may happen or but historically, and working with departments on how we build these budgets, we've been very careful with how we build these budgets. There's a reason we have the reserves that we do at this point, because we've been very careful with our budget. And then I would just emphasize that, again, what the budget process and the budget document does, what I want to be really careful is one of the biggest things we get is this is our roadmap and it sets our appropriations for spending for the next year. And we have to be very careful about, because like I said on Monday, there's uncertainty, but both from the negative and the positive, because I still think that we haven't gotten definitive answers about FEMA reimbursement for some of our COVID-related response, CARES Act funding on what's going to be allocated to local jurisdictions coming from the state. I know the federal legislation keeps coming up and it seems like it keeps coming up on a weekly basis on whether or not there's going to be assistance available for counties and cities with populations less than 500,000. So there's a lot of those discussions. So there's uncertainty all the way around. And although a lot of this budget, there's two limits that come into play on how we spend our funds during the budget year. The first one is the appropriations. We adopt a budget, we set appropriations. That's our spending limits on what we can spend in the fiscal year. But there's also a secondary limitation because we can't spend more than our revenues during the year. So if we have appropriations here, but our revenues come in here, we have that limitation. We cannot spend more than what our actual revenues are.
Mhm.
So there's some limiting factors that come into that help adjust for an 8% cut that may come in for community corrections as an example. They may be able to spend more of, they may have to use more of their ending balance or their reserves, or we may have to make adjustments between now and July 1 to adjust for that. Or the revenues come in shorter, they're going to have to, that department head, Jessica, is going to have to go in and look at, well, revenues are at this point, I have to reduce my expenditures down to this point, and then we have to make those difficult decisions throughout the year. So.
That's helpful to hear that. I guess that helps me. Thank you.
Kind of
So we
gets
have
the
those
picture.
two limitations that come into play, and it's
Right.
something that all of our departments and I try to monitor at the 35,000 foot level, although it seems like a lot of times I do get down into the weeds for almost the entire budget and working with those departments. But it is something that we monitor. We have very outstanding managers and department heads and finance staff that we are tracking these, and we monitor our reserves, we monitor what our balances look like, we're monitoring revenues. It's the reason, we were starting to get early updates on what was happening at the state level is because of our department heads and their connections at the state level with their agency reps, and also with their network groups that were getting forecasts on that, and also our work with the city. So, so I just wanted to put that out there that we have when we're considering these requests and we're going through these lists. We're trying to. All these requests are also to make sure that we can maintain an operational service level that the community expects from the county. For a lot of these areas, and especially with law enforcement and public health and community. I mean, we don't have a critical. Every one of our services that we provide here in the county is critical. We provide services throughout the county, and it's making sure that we have sufficient funding to sustain those operations and that level of service that the community expects out of us. So. And there's a lot of moving pieces because also, like it's come up several times, we're in negotiations on several contracts, and what those impacts are going to maybe require additional adjustments depending on where we went. And it could be either we have to make further adjustments to the budget, or we're going to have to look at where we can cost savings measures to meet whatever the agreed upon terms. So it's a challenging spring.
I would really expect myself that, the ones that are built into the budgets that we don't, since we hit the state revenue forecast hasn't came out yet, that I would not be a bit surprised to see the budget committee sitting here in June, first week or second week in June, doing a whole different budget based on what the state revenue forecast is. But Ken brought it up, well, there's so many things. A lot of these things are built into the budget, but there's so many things we don't know. So it's hard to say whether we want to approve these or don't approve these. My tendency would say the internal department ones that we approve because they're built into the budget. Although that could definitely change come June.
And keeping in mind, as part of the process, we have a budget committee process that happens right now, where once we start going through line by line through the deliberations, and we kind of get to that point, those final steps in approving the proposed budget, that then will move to the Board of Commissioners, which then there's a second hearing that's held in June and adoption. So there's several steps in place between now and June 30 that we have to go through before this is finally adopted. This is the third version of this budget. And then there will be, the final adopted version that the board's going to adopt here after another public hearing. So we have steps in place for making changes. And then we also recognize that during the new year, and usually we do that when we get more revenues and, you know, not necessarily less revenues, but we also have options for supplemental budgets and things like that. So, post-adoption, so.
Danny was going to say something.
Well, I was thinking back to Lindsay's initial conversation, and, you know, I have the privilege to sit on this board, you know, for 3 days every year. This is my 3rd year. And each year you know, it's a complicated budget, and I respect you guys a lot for putting this together. This is a lot of work, especially you. You rattle things off, and I'm like, that is impressive to know the details of, you know, I run a lot of businesses, and I got to keep a lot of details, and I look at you and I'm like, that's impressive. These are all individual businesses. But in my snapshot of 3 years, and I could be wrong, that's my question is, I remember leaving the first year going, and those beginning balances, those are great. I remember coming out going, this is very healthy. And then the next year it was less. And then this year there's some of them coming in with no. And so while I say, okay, we flattened it out and said, don't increase it. I feel like that all that did was, we didn't have to increase it. We just used more of our beginning balance to do what we needed to do. And now there's, in this portion, I know that we've had, you know, the sheriff's department in the year with the big projects coming to this, but, you know, we have the assessors, the administration, the county council, all of them hitting 0. And so I just in my business, I just look at trends. I'm like, I can weather this, but I can also see the end of my credit line go, if we don't change this, we don't. So I just, the change, or, you know, I see the slope going down, and I don't know. And I don't understand, obviously, the state input and the federal input, and the consequences of those actions are great. And I'm trying to bring it all in as you guys talk, but it just seems the trend is going the wrong direction. No, I mean, and this COVID and the community, or the business world and everything happening right now isn't helping anything at all. But I think being very aware of that is just really important right now.
I think Danny, one of the things I really appreciate Ken did this year, and I've been at, you know, for this for a couple of years, is actually not providing a discretionary allocation to begin with. Because I know that not all of our departments, most of them are pretty good, but there's departments who would use that discretionary allocation because they knew they had it, they could use it. If they didn't use it, they were going to lose it. So holding, not having any discretionary allocation and say, okay, you're not getting it. So we could then do a more better job of determining where that whole pot of money would go instead of to every department. Because I think they felt it was a right. They had a right to have that discretionary allocation.
It looks like Commissioner Sterry, were you going to say something?
Yes.
Okay. I just wanted to be sure.
Thank you. I think what we're looking at is, since we don't know, and really grateful to past boards because of the way they've budgeted, really responsibly and very conservatively, because even though, for instance, the state this last year had record revenue, they had, you know, there was no reason for there to be any cuts to any of our programs, but things are going to be different at the state level. And it's the golden rule, whoever has the gold makes the rules. And so many of our programs are tied to, in other words, the largesse of the state. And so it's sort of, we save for a rainy day and it's pouring. And based on that, I think we need to realize that it's not just pouring today, but we don't know how much worse it's going to be down the line. So we can make all the projections about 8.5%, and this is what the state's thinking. But what I've been concerned about all along is service insolvency, and I think that's what we're looking at, both from the state and locally. And the one thing I want to make sure is that none of the hard work that our departments have put in all through these years to stand up some excellent programs, that those don't have to have the legs kicked out from under them. And the way to do that is for us to be brutal and to sharpen the pencil and get a scalpel and say, look, there's just some stuff we There's wants, there's needs, and not every good cause deserves government funding, especially with what our people are facing. So I think we need to look at this with a real critical eye of saying, how do we keep what we've got going, but really be very cautious because we just don't know. I mean, I look at some of the health and human services programs that are so stellar statewide because of their ability to do things that no one else has thought of doing and doing so well. I'd hate to see some of that stuff go away, but we don't know because we're not paying for those. The state is. So I just say we need to be really careful with what we have because we don't know.
Can I have a follow-up too? Denny, is that okay?
Yeah.
I totally agree. I wanted to, so I think we need to be very careful. And I'm with you. We're probably not fully in alignment, but I think we're close. But I wanted to come back to Denny's comment about the reserves. And I think I have a slightly different perspective because when our business has money in the bank, that's a good thing. But when the county has money in the bank, it's, as Commissioner Sterrett reminds me all the time, it's not our money. The money that we receive from property tax and from state and federal and even from fees, that's money that people have given us either willingly or unwillingly in order to provide services. And and we talk about this a lot in the departments that I'm a liaison to is we have, a department will have this beginning balance and that's not actually like a really big beginning balance isn't actually good. I know this sounds really weird. It's not actually good from my perspective because it means that the county department is sitting on money that they really should be either giving back to you or providing services with it. And so that's just like a slightly different perspective, if that makes sense.
No,
When my
I agree
business
with-
is good, I mean, I'm
Yeah.
happy to have money in the bank.
Yeah.
So I don't know. It's just like an interesting way to think about it.
But there were counties that were relying on ONC dollars and they really had money in the bank.
Yeah.
And now that money is gone, that dried up.
Yeah.
And now they're shutting down their jails and they if they had spent all that money that they were relying on, they would have been insolvent years before that. So
That's right.
so really,
Yeah.
what we have coming in, that's not a guarantee, just like the ONC dollars. That was not, they had their tax rate is just really, really low because they didn't need it.
Mhm.
But they had huge revenues
Right.
that have dried up. We don't have any guarantee that any one of our revenue streams is solid and guaranteed. No business does. And the only difference is that we get to, use other people's money to do the work we're supposed to do.
Mhm.
So all I'm saying is I think we need to be even more concerned about what we're spending.
Yeah, I think from Josephine County, when they disbanded their sheriff's department, because they just can't fund their sheriff's department, they actually, almost every bit of their ONC dollars is used for operations. They don't use it for anything but operations. So in a way, that becomes part of their regular budget. And then without the reauthorization 2 years ago of ONC funds, they didn't do it. Now, luckily that the courts have found that the federal government had to go back to the original ONC agreement because they didn't have the right to withhold that ONC money. So now luckily it's been reauthorized and nobody could, so that we're guaranteed that money. But for a small county like us, it's not all money.
No,
It's not the same impact on us as the large timber county.
right.
We make a couple $1 million a year.
What we haven't talked about, thankfully, this is why I love Yamhill County, is increasing revenue. There's a lot of county commissioners out there who are talking about increasing revenue. Can you kind of speak to that in terms of our property tax rate and the fact that it's not been increased for 20-some years, 21 years? And who actually makes that decision, right, for the county rate?
Well, actually, that's gonna be one of the final actions that you do, because when you adopt the budget today, you also make a recommendation not to,
Right.
to to, because we haven't changed that rate in, well, since, I don't remember the last time it was updated. And it was, I've been with the county for going on 16 years. It was well before.
Right.
it came to the
Right, it's been
20
21 years.
years.
But a lot of people, I mean, if you're watching, a lot of people are very nervous about that reaction from government, right?
That's a good point.
That they're looking to us and they're nervous, they're scared about increasing property tax rates, income tax rates, business taxes. We're governed by or funded by fees and services too. Who makes those decisions? And
Well, there's a lot of, it's ultimately the board of commissioners. But keeping also in mind that when it comes to, there's a lot of, in the statute, I'm not going to come across as a property tax expert. And so that was kind of out there. This is where, I'd probably have to bring in Christian, Derek, we'd have a team that would approach that.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of limitations under statute on how much you can. Well,
Right.
I will say when it comes to revenues, all of the other revenues outside of property tax and some of the other taxes that come through from the state, from Department of Revenue,
Right.
like marijuana,
Right.
the alcohol, tobacco, things like that, that's outside of the state and we get a percentage of what the state collects and it's released from DOR. All the other revenues, even the intergovernmental agreements, all the intergovernmental funds are subject to an agreement that all comes before the Board of Commissioners as well. So all fee increases, everything like those are policy decisions that are set by the Board of Commissioners. From everything from licensing a dog to getting your CHL or a lot of those other fee areas, those individual departments have to bring their fee schedule or any changes to their fee schedule to the Board of Commissioners. And the Board of Commissioners are the ones that act on that fee schedule and what that's going to look like. That's ultimately the governing body who sets the policy for the county and setting the fee schedule to that area.
Well, I, for one, am thankful that this commission, at least, and past commissions have decided not to do that. And I think going forward, that's important for our taxpayers to know as well, that we are not talking about that. We're talking about how we function with what we have. So,
Yeah, it's a really good point. I think that stability and steady is an important thing for people to know. I just want to.
I would add to this conversation that it is impressive for me as a first-time person to see the reserves that we have and the ending balances, as Denny was mentioning. But I think, again, we have to remember that these funds are not ours, in a sense. We're a fiduciary. We're a steward of that. And I think when you make these changes or you add more expenses, would you do that in your own home? Would you do that in your own business with your declining income potential? Not potential. I like the word potential, but I think it's a realistic approach that it's going to happen. I don't know that we can sit here and say we're not going to be affected or maybe there'll be a bailout, but I think the realism is that we're going to have some adjustments to deal with. And would you go into knowing that your business just lost a major account, for example, and start spending extra money or doing a new project? That could be, at this point in a business world, it would be, I'm going to postpone, I'm going to put it off, or I'm going to find another way to fund it. So I think the cautionary tale here is that I think we really have to be very, very careful on maintaining a solid foundation, not just for this year, but for next year. As we draw down reserves, that'll affect next year because we'll be in a much more difficult situation with the kind of drawdown that we're going to be looking at or considering this morning.
Thank you for those thoughts.
All right. Any more conversation? Comments?
I really appreciate hearing from all of you. I just want to acknowledge that.
Well, I think the biggest thing is just we need to go through.
Yeah. So
Right.
I would recommend that we just start by tackling the departmental requests as a way of thinking about this. If that makes sense, Chair.
Yes, I would agree.
And it looks like
So-
we have fairgrounds at the top. Is that
Yeah, mine has the HHS at the top. We're just fairgrounds.
We're just crossing
Scrap
one
that
off.
one.
That feels
Okay.
good.
Um,
And if you'd like, I can help kind of shepherd us through the.
Sure, it'd be great.
The list, if you're okay with that.
I would be okay with that.
He's quite pleased to hear that.
The
It
first
looks
two, I
like
just
it.
have it on here on discussion, I have fairgrounds and parks, you know, that this has been, the allocation has been set for economic development for a couple of years now, and I just wondered if there's any discussion or questions about that, or changes to it, you know, otherwise it's built into the budget already.
I'll make a comment to that, not necessarily a question, but comment is, you know, a lot of people look at the fairgrounds as being, well, we have the county fair. Well, and that is, and we do have the county fair, but the county fair only makes up about 5% of the revenue coming in. County Summits Video Lottery dollar, but it's all the major events we have out there. We've gotten to the point now where we're actually starting to turn a corner, have been for a couple of years since Gary's been there, where buildings are getting in better shape, and those are county buildings, they're not fair buildings. Those are county buildings, and I would hate to take a step backwards, because that's, you know, the fair's building itself into a big event center. And I'd hate to take a step backwards and not put in that.
And the fact of the matter is that if there is a fair, who knows if there will be a fair, but they were actually, you know, they're turning a profit and doing really well the last few years. And I don't think we can count on that this year.
One question I have, I noticed that the money, so when we look at the fair budget, the money is actually going into the event center. And is that because this money is going to keep the buildings going, or is it because,
It's
That's
from the buildings.
Yeah,
Because
okay.
the buildings, it's the fair, it's the horse shows, it's the, what, the auction, it's the, you
Yeah.
know, there's a lot of events that, you know, so it goes to facilities to help. There's more of the fair has its own positive economic impact, but then also all the events throughout the year.
yeah, okay, great.
Do we have a motion?
Oh, just for clarification, this is coming out of video lottery reserve?
Correct.
Okay.
Out of Fund 26, economic development.
I would move that we approve the transfer of 70,000 from our Fund 1026 to the county fair through the event center fund.
I would second that.
Any discussion? All right, all in favor of moving $70,000 from the video lottery fund to the fairgrounds, signify by saying aye.
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 Any opposed? Pass unanimously.
Right, that's what the parks thing.
I would move that we, well, on the same reason,
Same reasons, 20,000.
same reasons, $20,000. And because, yeah, the justification for that being economic development has been articulated. So I would move approval of that $20,000 transfer from 1026.
Second. Oh, sorry.
Any discussion? All right, all in favor of transferring $20,000 from Fund 1026 to the parks, signify by saying aye.
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 Any opposed? Pass unanimously.
I would, I would suggest that since we're talking about economic development, we don't need to do this, but we talk about the parkway while we're talking about economic development, the parkway lobbyist, because that's a request that's lower down. Does that make any sense? Or maybe we should put that off.
Yeah, I'm thinking that's in a different,
Okay, that sounds good.
all different, yeah.
I have a different view about it, so.
Okay.
You're right, it's in that gray area, is it really a department, you know, because it's a county function, it's not really a community request.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think it's up to the committee.
Okay. Yeah, go ahead. Do you want to talk?
And the reason why I wanted to bring it up now is that it does seem like it is part of, it's a bump up in the request for the lobbyist. I'm I'm uncomfortable with increasing it. I am comfortable. Just want to be clear that I'm glad that we have somebody who's not one of us and is not Dave working on all the details of both the federal and state level funding for a regional economic, potential driver. But
And personally, that's one, bumping it up 10,000. It hasn't been bumped up since we actually did the original allocation. Because I feel very strongly, this is the year we now have somebody at ODOT who is listening to us and working for us. And we have our congressional delegation was very much for it. And if there's an infrastructure bill, if we're gonna get it, now's the time to get it. But you don't, I hate to admit, and lobbyists do, probably, if it wasn't the work of our lobbyist team, we probably wouldn't be sitting on phase one. We wouldn't be using phase one right now, because that was pushed through by our lobbyist team. And it was in conjunction with the elected officials. So bumping it up 10,000, and everybody's being requested to bump theirs up, so we can put more, this year, put more time into that lobbying. I don't have a problem with that myself, because it does. 99W has been designated by the state federal highways as a high priority freight corridor, as a disaster evacuation corridor from the federal government. So I guess bumping up $10,000, I don't have because I think it is definitely economic impact.
I do have a problem with bumping it up, and that is if you look at what Summit Strategies gets, not only from the county, but from all the partners,
Yeah.
significant amount of money. I don't know that this $10,000 is going to make, or even the collective new ask is going to make that much difference, because what we have to also factor into is the costs of commissioners who go back on those lobbying trips, and the fact that we have had a very significant impact to date, but I don't know that this is necessarily going to move the project forward anymore. So I would not be in favor of that increase.
Well, going back to what something Commissioner Stern said, which is very important about elected officials, going back to Washington, it is the lobbyists who arrange to make sure everybody's meeting with the people they need to, when they need to meet with them, with what congressional delegation. I mean, last time we were back, I've only been back there once, but they arranged a meeting with federal highways, they arranged a meeting with presentation of Build America, with the Department of Transportation, Department of Federal Highways, and the lobbyists did all the arranging. We just had them show up and take part in the presentation. We had no ground, we didn't have to lay any groundwork. Now, if we have to go back and start laying that groundwork, I think we're gonna more than eat up that time. That's just my opinion.
But they did it with the existing revenue. I mean, they've been doing the work with a certain amount of money, and I don't think that the fact that we've had a holdup has been because for a lack of lobbying effort or lack of lobbying dollars. So I don't see that this is necessarily going to move the project forward. The project has been held up for a number of different reasons. Anyway, that's just my 2 cents.
Chair.
So are we to move on
I think that
approval of this and then we can?
I'm confused. Did
Oh,
we
I thought
just
you were
jump
asking me to do
down 10
something.
items or?
Yeah, well,
I don't-
I just
Casey
requested
asked the
that-
question, 'cause
yeah.
it's really. a
I'm sorry
county-
that-
It's county thing, but it's
Economic
not
development.
Yeah.
county, it's
Okay.
really economic development.
Together.
Do we have a contract that we signed
Yeah.
with them?
Yes,
Is
we
the
have
contract
one.
coming due or is that why we're discussing an increase?
It was just an increase in the
Contract costs.
no, it was actually the collective, the lobbyist partners were asking for us to increase or to put the gas on, if you will, this project. And that would be by increasing it and asking for more lobbying hours.
Yeah, and I know the city of McMinnville, city of New York, city of Dundee, and the Confederated Tribes, they're also being asked to, compared on what they've given before, they're asking to be updated that much also. So it's not
Right.
just us, it's all the partners.
Right.
Well, most lobbyists that I know have they operate on contracts. I cost this much money to do X amount of work, right? So I guess my question is the lobbyist saying, in order to move forward, I'm requiring this much more funding? or?
I will just say that on the request that was submitted, and this is why, this was like one of those odd ones, is it a community request or is it not?
Yeah.
You know, but Dave Hagenberg on behalf of, the Parkway Committee was asking for an increase in our lobbying budget, which is currently $117,900. And it's requesting an increase of the county's commitment from 40,000 to 50,000. But it doesn't necessarily, and he's also in the process of seeking additional funding from the other partners, but it doesn't necessarily say that it's specifically related to the lobbyist contract or a budget, or if this is the, it didn't get that specific.
I think what also makes this an odd thing is that normally a lot of our partners that we ask, especially nonprofits or whatever, but the Parkway Committee is an actually officially appointed committee of the county.
Right.
So that's why it's kind of an oddball, because this is one of our committees coming to us asking for additional funds.
It's different because usually we would,
It's definitely different.
if the contract comes before the board and it's 5% more than what it was last year, we would go and look at do we have appropriations for it?
Yeah.
And if we do, we would make the change, and that's a board level decision.
Yeah.
This was a little bit unique because it was submitted through the budget process and they asked for an additional 10,000, they budgeted an additional 10,000. So
I'm concerned on a number of different levels about this, because I know we've had a relationship with Summit Strategies for years, and those relationships can get real cozy. And I think that it's just too easy to ask for additional funds for an existing contract, to say, because I don't know that we're keeping an eye with an eye on this particular thing, to say, hey, is this even a lobbyist we want to stay with? So I think it just gets a little bit gray when we don't have that really more critical oversight. I don't know why we're not being given specifics about
The
more
Parkway-
hours.
The Parkway Committee gets, I think on a quarterly basis, semi-anyways, gets a breakdown from Summit Strategies on everything they did, how much.
We
how
get
long
that
it
too.
So, I mean,
Right.
it's not like they're not reporting to us, we know what that might be.
No, what I mean is the additional ask, where was that in because we always get the breakdown as to what, she has done, but I don't know that there's been a change in what she would be doing or what he's asking
What the
us.
two of them would be doing.
Yeah,
I guess my perspective on it is it comes back to the reason why I suggested that we, or asked that we consider it now, is because it comes out of the economic development, the 1026 fund, and I want to be really careful about how we use that money, because this is one of those areas where we know the income into it has dropped considerably. That I would be questioning the same thing if there was an ask for said core of an additional amount. It's just my concern, and that's why I wanted to talk about it now.
So
Well-
Chair, are you wanting us to vote on this item now?
Well, I think,
Yeah, do you?
in my opinion, we've discussed it enough. At this point, we should not revisit it again. Does anybody have a motion at this time?
Vic, do you have any?
Do we actually have to have a motion to deny?
No,
Do we-
I'm with everyone else.
yeah.
I'm not into spending more money, so I'll make the motion that we deny the request.
Second,
Any discussion?
It would have been nice to have more data, and maybe even Dave here, that's hard, be able to ask questions, but in lack of information.
and I just wanted
But I think we're in discussion. I
We
think
just
it's a-
asked for discussion.
Yeah.
what I want to really be careful because the nature of just keeping in mind with the social distancing that we've had to do this week, I think
Yeah.
one of the disadvantages that a lot of requests have for this year that they haven't had past year is usually we would be hearing 2+ hours of presentations and
That is
Mm-hmm.
correct.
So I just want to
Yeah.
go on record.
And that's what I mentioned.
So
Yep.
it's challenges, so I
Yeah.
agree.
I understand.
And I would follow up, Rick, on that. If we in the future, as a board of commissioners, saw a contract that came before us that was like, oh, here's what we're doing, it's something that I would definitely consider in just kind of the normal, the ongoing. Because I remember that we approved their existing contract not that long ago.
So, yeah.
Yeah, I would just, I mean, Commissioner Olson, I've sat in some of those meetings with you. I think they're doing a really good job. But I would agree with Commissioner Starrett that there's, 10 other factors that go into why the bypass hasn't moved forward past the point we're at now. So I don't think that change, appropriating 10,000 more is going to really change that.
All right. All right. So all in favor of denying the increase from $40,000 to $50,000 for the Parkway Committee, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed?
I,
Passes.
You would not be able to show up at the next meeting,
Oh, I'll
would
show
you,
up.
if you didn't?
No, sure,
And for the record, if the Road Improvement Advisory Committee, I would be, I would be that person too.
Oh, that's right. That's right.
I was thinking back to all the advisory committees that I, am the liaison to. It's like,
Yeah.
All right. So are we
thank you
moving
for addressing that out of
to
order.
number 4, District Attorney?
Yes.
All right. Are you going to explain that or do you want me to?
So just really quickly, if you remember, there's the district attorney made a request for the support enforcement division budget of $74,468 of discretionary funds that help support the operations of the office. And keeping in mind, like he talked about, this is one of those that if you were to cut, because we get federal match, so we get, so
2 for
Yeah.
1.
That's a
To
2
balance.
to 1.
that cut's
Right.
gonna be a lot more than 74,000.
Right.
And to provide some further context, we also recently approved a support enforcement division supervisor position. And I think it's our contribution to it, is maybe 20,000 of general fund in the current budget, or maybe 25,000 for the support enforcement division supervisor. Do you remember?
I don't.
Okay, I'm sorry that I don't have that in front of me. I should have, but I just wanted to put that into some of the context.
Yeah,
So we just
people-
approved a supervisor, and now we are being asked to add more. So.
I move.
The one that we did approve is I think what we approved is changing the FTE. Because the $20,000 won't cover any of those supervisors. No way, and I think we covered an FTE.
It was an existing employee, but we,
It was
No,
not
they're-
an existing
yeah,
one.
it
was a
wasn't?
Brand new
Brand
position.
new position.
It was a new position, just recognizing that there's some both physical location challenges with administrative oversight and supervision of that office. And because they're downstairs in the DA chairs
Efficiency.
and for efficiency's sake, so yeah, it's used.
so, but there was a reclass in there as well, or no? Okay.
There was a reclass that was done several years ago. And
Oh, yes,
Okay,
there was a
there was a request. Yeah, but
got it. Yes, thank you.
I was just searching brain too. I just wanted to give you the budget committee some context.
Context.
All right.
Okay.
Do we have a motion?
I'll make a motion that we approve.
Second?
Okay. Any discussion?
I think it's important to acknowledge that, again, that this is all gets matched very strongly by the state. So while this is a general fund, ask for ongoing operations, it is a state match, or there will be a state match to it.
There's a federal component in there
Federal.
too, isn't
That's what I
there?
thought. Yeah.
Yes, sir.
Yeah. Okay. So
Federal.
thank you.
Okay.
That's
All right.
all my comments.
All right, all in favor of increasing from general fund of $74,468 to the district's attorney? Signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? All right, pass unanimously. All right, we have 3 sheriffs. Do we handle them individually?
Yes,
Okay,
sorry, I saw it.
I would say we're taking a long time,
We know
Si.
The
It's important to do this now.
The
Even
one
though he needs to go.
challenge that we have with the jail is there's a memorandum that was handed out
Yeah.
that we have before you. Admittedly, the timing in me getting this was, I haven't quite figured out, went through this in detail to see if this needs to modify the request. So looking at how fast we're moving through the deliberation list, I may ask that maybe we hold off on doing this one because if we break for a lunch break, for a
You might
period
have
of
time.
it would give me time to look at it and see if we need to make any adjustments to the ask that was
Yeah.
made.
I think that sounds fine.
so should we come back to all of the sheriffs?
It looks like it was
I think it's just for the jail.
It was only for the jail, and then the other one
Patrol.
is something that's missing on your list that I need to put on there, but that's an easy, that's more of a minor budget adjustment in the Marine Patrol budget. In fact, usually we won't even deliberate or act on some of those, that's something that our budget team would just act on.
Yeah.
So we can come back
Well,
to the jail one, but I think the troll.
That one didn't make the list.
Troll is on here. It's increased to 50.
43 is on here too. I think that's
Yeah.
back. Yes, let's just skip them.
Oh, yeah, I only saw
Come
jail at the
back.
beginning of the memo.
Patrol's here, emergency management's here.
All right, so we jump to number 8, assessors.
Or you could actually act on the emergency management.
Okay, we'll go to emergency. All right,
Let me make sure that's not on this one. Okay.
No, it's not.
Is it not
as
on
far as I
there?
can tell.
It's on this one.
okay, we have a request to allocate $43,731 from general fund to increase for the emergency management from the sheriff's office.
I would move that we accept that request.
A second.
Any discussion?
The one discussion I've had, and I'm definitely voting for this, is that we, Yamhill County, in the last few years, have gone from a county that was didn't know a lot about emergency management, and couldn't handle probably emergency if they had to. And then when Brian Young moved over and came back under the sheriff, we probably have one of the better emergency managements in all the counties. So I think this is
It's good to hear.
well-deserved.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think we're more ready for a Cascadia now, and I want to support that effort financially.
Mm-hmm.
All right, all in favor of the allocation of $43,731 to emergency management, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Pass unanimously. All right, assessor. Assessor is looking for an allocation from general fund of $429,338.
So the one thought I had about this, I'm not opposed to this because I recognize that this is a department who is one of the core of our ongoing operations, right? The behind the scenes that maybe nobody really wants to think about at times. And I think that they do a really good job of it. The one thing I just want to acknowledge is that we probably, based upon what I see, we're probably going to have, this 37% increase is going to be the new baseline for
standard.
this budget because there's not like there's a new place that they're going to be getting money from. So this most likely, when we approve it, will be kind of what it is
Right.
in the future.
Yeah, the majority of their.
New staffing
majority of
levels.
theirs is fee-based, is their revenue is fee-based, and I have to agree with you. assessor that for 5 years, they didn't put on any additional staff. And they haven't saved by not putting on staff, some of it intentionally because they knew they were gonna go to more automated tools. And so I don't have a problem with this because it's like, okay, you saved for 5 years, we didn't put on staff. But now, although you did that, thanks for basically, I agree, Commissioner Kula, that this will probably come in the mix.
Absolutely.
I just want to clarify too that there's 360,000-ish from CAFA, and then there's a small amount. So it's a fairly, the county puts up a fair significant portion of it, but I'm still for it because I think it's really important.
Yeah, there's no, of course.
I don't have
Yeah.
percentage
I know, I was-
on their revenues, because I don't necessarily get down to the department level, but
How much is
majority of
CAFA,
the
percentage
assessor's
is CAFA?
office that is discretionary, it's general fund.
Oh, it's a good point though. If anybody was the,
I bet Derek has a chart in there if I remember right.
yeah, so there's a chart, but it actually doesn't have the general fund money in it. Sorry, Derek, I'm calling you out, and I love you anyway. But that's
What
there
is
would
that?
be
Shows
another
CAFA.
pie.
Shows
Uh,
CAFA.
Yeah, there would be another pie for the general fund.
All right. We have a motion and a second, correct?
Yes.
Is there?
No?
No motion. All right, do we have a motion?
Second.
I'll make the motion.
Oh, I thought,
And a motion and a second.
okay.
All right,
To approve it.
to approve. So all in favor of a general fund allocation increase of $429,338 to the assessor's office, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed? All right, passes unanimously. All right,
He's doing a dance somewhere.
administration. Administration is seeking $50,000 to increase and add FTE for additional HR analysts.
Yeah, and I can speak to this one. So we had the request that came forward. Again, this is one of those that there's an additional cost that doesn't necessarily, it's one of those that in government that sometimes additional costs don't generate more revenue or services. What it does is it potentially reduces our exposure and our risk in handling cases that could end up in litigation, grievances, insurance claims, things like that. We do have, right now, our HR to employee ratio is way behind industry standard. And this won't even get us to the 1-to-70 or 1-to-80, depending on whose recommendation you're looking at. But it does help close that gap. And I just want to know that our HR office, having held that position for several years, previously when I was the HR manager, it is a very busy office, and it became very clear in a pandemic with the amount of workload and the hours that our HR team has been putting in. Just the process leaves alone has been significant, much less trying to get out in front of personnel things and advising departments and so this is something that I truly believe will be money well spent. It's something that we've seen a lot of growth in all of our departments, and there hasn't been a lot of growth for admin and those support services for supporting all this growth that's occurring in all the departments.
I think,
I could-
going back to what Ken said, that you don't see, because it's not a revenue thing where you get revenue off it. But in the last 2 years, I've seen such a difference in our risk management. And in order to keep our risk management moving in the direction it needs to move, I think this is a critical thing, because that's what's going to get, 1 or 2 lawsuits or 1 or 2, and you're going to lose it with something that's insured. But still, I think having somebody that actually knows risk management and can assist in HR is critical.
I couldn't agree more. I think with the Department of Labor and the rules that have come down, it is trip lines everywhere. And so I'm sure the risk manager of the county will appreciate the extra hands, and it's well needed.
And the fact that in government, there are different, especially, with all of the different leaves and the complexity of all the different leaves, plus you add in the contracts and the, some of the CBAs that allocate certain types of leaves. It's so complicated that this goes beyond what the private sector would necessarily have to deal with. So while it is, in effect, growing government, it's not really our fault. And we're trying to manage for all these rules and regulations and all these things we're supposed to do by the book. But as you said, Rick, it really is, there are a lot of different opportunities for there to be some really serious
Compared to 2 or
problems.
3 years ago, it's almost a day and night difference in job requirements.
Yeah.
Yeah, there was a lot of new legislation that
Yeah.
has come out of the last
Yeah.
couple of legislative sessions that there's all kinds of new laws that have come down. And then also just recognizing that we also, Yamhill County has over 600 employees. We have 5 labor unions. We have a very large we have a large management team as well that tries to do the best they can. We're also, just as the county in general, we've also been going through a bit of a transition. A lot of our management team are new managers, especially our frontline supervisors. We've been seeing a number of retirements over the last several years, so a lot of our department heads are new, and that just requires, that training piece, or more of a burden falls on HR to help provide guidance and assistance.
I would only add this, that in working in this arena, it's another factor that we don't think about is that you could have a large company and it's one campus. This has got multiple campuses in different cities in the county, and that in itself creates a lot of challenges.
Mhm.
All right, do we have a motion?
I'll make a motion that we approve the administration's request and a need for additional HR analysts in the amount of $50,000.
Second.
All right, we
I
have
think you
first
should
and a
get the second. Rick John gets the second
All
on
right,
that one.
I was
That's
barely
the
there.
expert. There we go.
all right, all in favor of a general fund allocation to increase the administration budget of $50,000, signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed? All right, pass unanimously. All right, it's 12. Can we do this last one in and then come back to the sheriffs? Is that all right? County council is requesting 28,500 to increase for a cut of professional services.
Yeah, so county council, this was one that, in order, follow the budget instructions that were put out, and in order to present a balanced budget, you made a cut with professional services and
Right.
to balance that budget. And so what he's asked is for the increase in discretionary funds to restore those funds to professional services.
Did
This-
Lindsay's question get answered? That was put out yesterday before we.
That's Christian.
I think Christian.
I don't feel like I can make a decision on this one until I know where that money went for 1920 and who it went to, and then what the plan is for outside counsel going forward for this year.
And I have a question about when we do bargaining and we use outside counsel for bargaining, how does that fall into the shortfall from county council's budget?
It depends on the contract that's being negotiated and the services that we're using that outside counsel for. In years prior, when we used outside counsel to bargain with, here's Christian just signed in. Hey Christian, but in years past, we've paid for, depending on the contract negotiations, we've paid at a 1039 or one of those for the general employee union, but there has been times that if we're dealing with grievances or something that's not necessarily collective bargaining a new contract, Christian has paid for that out of his budget as professional services.
But I'm thinking about
I'm just gonna move the cursor if you all want.
thinking about, so when we've had one particular contract with someone to do bargaining. Is that coming out of county council's budget when we've chosen to pay for that contract?
Kristen,
If I understand the question, we have, in the past bargaining cycles, the outside council fees for negotiating with the Teamsters and their contract came out of county council. The outside council fees for negotiating with YCEA historically came out of administration.
or
So the outside counsel is limited to, can you give us an idea of, was it based on particular cases or lawsuits against the county or?
So are you asking now about where the money within the professional services line is traditionally been spent?
Yeah, I'm just trying to get an idea of, in other words, was it used for bargaining? How much of it is used for bargaining? And
So it depends from year to year. This past year, 1920, so far I don't believe we've spent any money out of professional services on bargaining because we did not, for the YCEA bargaining, did not gauge outside counsel for this bargaining.
not for bargaining, but we did for dispute resolution.
Right, we have spent some money on some grievances, but not on bargaining.
okay, thank you.
And Christian, I just have a question. This is Casey. You're asking for 25,000 in that line for professional services, but it looks like you have trended higher than that. Do you do you expect that you're going to have lower expenses there?
Yeah, definitely, and this gets at, I believe, Lindsay's question as well.
Mhm.
Of the 43, and I'm looking at a number that may not actually be current through today, because we've had some other outside council expenses that have continued to come in, but I believe the current amount is 43,212. $36,434 is directly related to the litigation expense that arose out of the trail litigation. So of the amount that's been spent out of professional services this year, only about $6,800 has been spent on other outside counsel expenses. And that trail litigation expense was a one-time litigation cost for a particular case. And those costs ran from the time that that case was, or the complaint of that case was filed, which was, excuse me, the fall of 2017. That case was actually filed before the county had completed the acquisition of the corridor. So it named UP. And then after the acquisition closed, Union Pacific stayed in the litigation, and then Yamhill County was added. So what happened is we weren't billed for the majority of those litigation-related costs until August of last year, but those expenses went back to the time, around the time that that case was filed. Much of the expense was incurred in the spring of last year because the case was actually resolved in the county's favor at the point of a summary judgment motion. So preparing for and receiving a positive outcome in that summary judgment motion last spring is when we incurred the most recent amount of expense.
Is there a way to take that out of money that we have for the trail from any of the grant money?
And that may be a question for Ken.
Your explanation, by the way, was helpful to me. Thank you. But
Sure.
the question is still.
Maybe Mary, I'm not understanding your question. Taking it out of, you mean some of the grant funds or other funds for the trail?
So, you know, for the last 5 years, I've been really annoying and asking for a line item on the trail and what it's costing the county. And just so that we can just put eyes on it. And these are the types of costs that are costing the county while the trail project is ongoing. So this is not something that we see in a line item, but if it's showing up in a shortfall in county counsel's office that needs to be backfilled, it seems like we're not really delineating that. So I guess what I'm saying is if the county is going to be proceeding in this project, can the funds for that, which it's related all the times that we're having to litigate these cases, that we actually consider that an expense of the trail?
So, I mean, this is not a ongoing expense of the trail as far as my office and professional services historically is concerned. Ken and I talked about when this bill came in, about where the appropriate source of these funds would be. And at the time, there was sufficient appropriation authority, and I believe there still is sufficient appropriation authority within my budget to pay for this amount. So we decided at that time to leave the expense there. That's how this expense ended up coming out of professional services in this current year.
And I just want to be clear that it wasn't this bill that suddenly put this budget out of balance with the revenue. It's not that he overspent his appropriation, which then resulted in a shortfall going into the next year. It's that the holding flat and roll-ups in his own personnel lines and some of those operational costs is where he had to make some cuts to his materials and services categories. It wasn't really, it's not specific to, litigation or expenses that occurred this current year that resulted in him having a shortfall next year. Because we can't do that. Because by that, we would be saying that he overspent his appropriations and resulted in a shortfall.
But would that $43,000 have been a balance carried forward conceivably if it didn't go to this?
Potentially.
Yeah.
So then there wouldn't be a need for us at this point to try to ask for extra money.
Potentially, because eventually he'd be here with that.
Yeah.
He'd be using more of his beginning balance.
Yeah.
To address this, to fund this additional, to fund this professional services line.
Right.
That beginning balance is only there until it's,
So it's not.
Right.
it's not.
There's a small beginning balance, and then if there's zero ending balance, we come back to it.
So Christian, is it accurate to say then that there were no outside counsel legal expenses in 1819? That you didn't actually get the bill until 1920?
No, we did have outside counsel expenses in 1819.
Specific to the trail, though?
I'm sorry?
Specific to the trail, for outside counsel for the trail?
There was one bill that was also related to this litigation that came during the 1819 year. That was $4,836.90. So that bill came in. It was part of the same matter. We got that bill in 1819. The balance of the bill then came in August of last year in 1920.
Okay.
So we
And
paid that initial bill out of professional services in the 1819 year, along with other outside counsel expenses that were not related to that particular.
but you said that $36,434 of the $43,000 was trail, so that's 85% of the outside counsel expenses was the trail.
It was a large amount in August of last year. If there's a silver lining to that number, it's that the balance of what we've had to spend on outside counsel is so far about $6,800, which means we've managed to keep our outside counsel, and I would expect this going forward to be the same, keep that number lower, which is why I anticipate the $25,000 being more than sufficient for the next budget year. I don't expect another sizable cost related to the trail in the next year. Of course, litigation being what it is, those are unforeseen events. We don't know. The county's position and the defense of this case was something that the board had approved, and the strategy was discussed with the board and administration at the time. If we were faced with another round of litigation that was related to the trail, I would have those conversations with the board again to determine whether there was support from the board to pursue any of those types of claims if and when they occur.
Okay, but as we've seen in the news, litigation is ongoing, clearly, with the trail. So can we expect that 85% of this new ask of $25,000 or so could conceivably go to the trail?
Well, that's a good question
No,
to clarify.
Because,
Yeah.
because the cost associated with the ongoing, I'm assuming you're referring to the remand and to the other issues that are currently before LUBA and the board, those are being handled internally. So we're not incurring outside legal expenses for those matters. And I wouldn't expect that to change going forward.
Okay.
I would not characterize them as litigation, I guess, is part of it.
So a question, again, not to harp on this one point about keeping a line item or keeping track. And I know that you don't keep track of, in other words, if you do a particular work for one particular department, but this is a significant amount of time, county council's time, this remand or any of the other past actions, that it does take up a considerable amount of Todd's time or your time. And that's county resources, and that's time, because I know how hard both of you work and that you're here really late at night and there's a lot of work for you to do. And it doesn't seem like there's any end to it. So what I guess I've been saying all along is, if we don't have if we're going to allocate county resources, your resources and Todd's to this isn't the first time it's been litigated. Who knows if it's the last? Is that what we're subsidizing? I guess I'm trying to see if we can find a way to pay for it out of money that we're getting for the trail instead of out of your office.
I guess if I'm gonna, hey, Christian, hold on, I'm sorry, let me go.
He raised his hand.
What I really want to be careful with is what, and I recognize, and I don't want to, because I recognize that this is what the discussion, but I do want to kind of come back as part of the budget committee. What we're reviewing is we have an ask for budgeted funds and how we're going to build a budget moving forward. And county council has a request for fund because, he needs the funds, and whether that, how that's going to get spent on professional services. I just want to be very cautious, and, that if we start getting into policy discussions or policy decisions on this, I recognize that it's kind of hard to separate the two, but really we have a request for funds. The request isn't to spend money on potential litigation associated with the trail. It is for outside professional services. So if we need to retain outside counsel for any potential case that may come forward, and there's other examples that have come forward that we've had to, whether it's workload issues or if it's a certain technical aspect or expertise that you need to have on the table on a particular issue, I was looking at some of the things that are listed, you know, like helping Public Works with an issue we were having with a contractor on a bridge contract. So having someone, you know, there's times that we have to bring in specialized counsel to assist with county counsel's office and get there. And so I just want to be careful that, you know, on what the request is for. It's for general professional services. You know, and I know I just want to make sure that we're restating the purpose of the budget committee.
Yeah.
We're reviewing the request, we're looking at it, and I recognize there is a certain amount of policy setting that goes into building a budget or doing that, and I just want to be careful with that. And I recognize the frustrations with the trail expenses and how those are budgeted within the budget, but right now the only fund outside of staff costs associated to the grant manager, any of my time, county counsel's office, the parks office, you know, it is coming from multiple sources that spend time on that, but the grants and project development costs are all in 4161 is where those grants are coming in and where the money's being spent in that. But I do recognize that a lot of the staff time that goes into that project is not reflected in the 4161. So I just wanted to just chime in. Now,
I think Christian was going to say something. Yeah.
No, thanks, Kim, that's explained it in a way that's more detailed and clearer than I would have been able to, but let me just sort of reiterate again, when Ken and I talked about this expense, we agreed at the time that it made sense to take out of my budget because it was outside council related expense, and it appeared that my budget could support that expenditure within the appropriation authority that I had. That being said, that larger expense and that kind of expense is not necessarily what this fund, at least in my time since I've been here, is more traditionally used for. When we've had other types of litigation, the money has come from some other funds, and this fund has historically been, as I explained a little bit yesterday, and Ken just explained with the example from Public Works, used to assist us when we run into some specialized questions or where we have a specific need in a technical subject area where neither Todd or I are subject matter experts. The Public Works matter was an insurance issue. I mentioned yesterday we've used outside counsel for property tax litigation. And that's what I would expect this fund to be used going forward. And if it helps at all, I'm certainly willing to and would expect to have these conversations with the Board of Commissioners if at some point in the future we are faced with another lawsuit or trail-related litigation separate from the land use proceedings that we're involved in at the moment. I would expect to come to the board and discuss with the board and discuss with the administration and Ken and others about what the most appropriate source of funds to pay for that expense might be, assuming at that point, there is still, it is still a policy position of the board to continue to move this trail forward. So if that helps at all, I'm willing to put that forward, that if we get a trail-related, again, separate from the land use proceedings, another trail-related legal expense. Certainly happy to have additional conversations with the board and administration at that time about what the most appropriate source of funding to pay those expenses might be.
Great. Thank you, Christian.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I wasn't saying thank you for you, but I appreciated hearing his descriptions of the specialized outside counsel. So I recognize that it's important to have, as you noted, have this money in that budget. So.
All right, any more discussion? We ready for?
Yeah, I appreciate the clarification because if you look back historically at that line item, back to 17, 18, there was almost 46,000, and then 18, 19 was almost 39. And then you budgeted 25 for 19, 20, and what was the actual so far is 43. So it seems like there's been a consistent expenditure there, but it's kind of shocking that 85% of the last one was for the trail. So if not for the trail, you would have been down closer to 7.
Yeah, and I can explain that. The reason that the amounts were higher in 17, 18 and part of 18, 19 is that that's before we brought on our third attorney. So what you're
Okay.
seeing in those years is a higher use of outside counsel because we didn't have a third attorney on staff.
Okay.
So that's where I think if you, again, removing the single trail litigation matter out of 1920 so far, you're seeing what I would expect to see going forward with 3 attorneys is a reduced use of professional services because we have now a third attorney.
Makes sense. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
All right, so we have a request for,
I would move approval of the general fund allocation add back to professional services for the county council office.
I'll second.
all right. All in favor of a general fund allocation to increase professional services of county council of 28,500, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed?
Aye.
Motion passes.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Christian.
Go ahead and log off.
All right. I believe I heard some of you guys saying you guys had a commitment.
She does.
I did.
Did.
Did
Did.
Noon.
I noticed
Uh-oh.
you were watching it at like 11:45.
It wasn't going to happen.
Yeah.
I sent Lindsay an email and I saw her log off
I
at
saw her log off too, but I
11:59.
didn't know the connection.
Okay.
Oh,
I guess, like I said, we would still need to come back to the sheriff's office. Also, I'm gonna go get off my desktop that's open, the saved copy that also has there's a few other items that I wanted to add for deliberation related to the department internal. And I think some of them, 2 of the discussion items, one in particular, is going to be around reserves and offsetting some of these costs. So we were talking yesterday about the insurance.
Oh, yeah.
I don't know if we wanted to adjourn for lunch.
Can we do a short lunch rather than an hour and a half?
Like 20 minutes?
Yeah, let's do.
I need an hour.
Go feed puppy.
I've got a meeting at 1:10.
So
I mean,
Until
I have
1:30 again?
A meeting later tonight too, but. Wait, so how long is when are you back here then?
My meeting's not that long. I mean, I could come back at. It's just.
We also do have a majority of the budget committee, even without you being present. I just want to note that. Because there's quite a few things we still have to get through.
If I could avoid it, I would, but I can't avoid it. So it's probably only 5 minutes long, but I can't say that I'd be right here at 1:15. So
1:30.
1:30 would be better.
What everybody else wants to do.
I mean, I'd really prefer to keep going as much as possible because there's a long list of things here. So an hour.
I'm not opposed to keep going and maybe break at 1 for a half
yeah,
hour.
that's an option, huh?
Can we do
That's
that?
fine.
Can we just keep going and eat? We've done that
We could
before.
eat, keep
I
going.
feel like we
Eat
did
while
that
we're
last
going.
week, didn't
We
I'm
did that
okay.
last year.
I'm okay with continuing until you need to leave. and then take-
I would just need between 1 and 1:30 for
Okay.
sure. Otherwise, I'll have to
You can
step
get
out.
somewhere.
The only ask that I have if we're gonna continue is that we would still have to circle back to the sheriff's office request, because like I
Yeah.
mentioned, I got this morning and I haven't had a
Okay.
chance to see if we can modify because especially if you want me to. Weigh in on the.
Why don't we just break for 15 minutes to get our lunch and then we'll get a chance?
And then come back.
Or we could have a working lunch and we can just keep charging forward and then take a break at 1.
You can go.
Yeah,
you to
let's
do
do that.
Have-
Let's,
give me some
and
time
you
at 1
take
o'clock,
a 15, 20-minute break while you go do.
And then we can go through the community requests.
Okay.
Right?
sounds great.
We can go ahead. and
Are we
do
still
that.
live?
I believe so.
So
Oh,
we're
not-
grabbing lunch.
live. We haven't adjourned yet.
Do you want to adjourn this? Are we
Do we
adjourned?
want to?
Oh, no, we're going to keep
We're gonna
going.
keep
Sorry.
going.
We're gonna
Okay.
keep going until at least 1.
Are we gonna
Okay.
sit and eat while we do this?
Yeah.
Yeah, you're welcome to.
All right. Well, everybody,
You're okay with
let's go grab our lunches and then we can just kind of walk through the public.
Yeah, let's do that. Good idea.
everybody's okay with eating like
Oh,
that?
yeah. This is just,
I think we did it last year, so.
yeah, I know. It's great. We were all sitting there. We did it last year.
Yeah.
Oh, that's okay. I'll take a walk to the.
Oh, thank you very much. Kind of keep my, especially my distance from you.
So no endorsements last night, huh?
The last Friday in April.
That was May 1st, or last, it was in April though.
You'd hardly know that we're still in session.
Yeah.
And we don't have a majority of the budget committee, so we can't make any decisions right now. Remember, we're still live. I'm sorry that your fiber got cut, by the way. Commissioner Olson was on our roundtable Zoom call right after this meeting, which I managed to get back in time for without speeding. And then he just disappeared in the middle of the call and then typed in darn fiber cuts. I was assuming it was because
We
the,
got to notice that they
okay,
bring everybody down.
okay. Gosh.
But did you like was my new camera and microphone better?
I was gonna mention that to you, actually. You were much clearer.
Yeah, I got a
Yeah, both of them.
I bought a good Logitech camera
Okay,
and a Hanson microphone. But what I noticed is this, the Hanson camera was good. They were on backward. You can't buy cameras, any webcams, anything.
oh, right.
Can't even get them on Amazon. Amazon's totally not shipping till at least middle of May. So can I think it's because you know to stay home, stay safe?
Yeah.
Everybody's buying
They're,
microphones.
they're doing their
For a lot
thing.
of cameras.
Was the council vote, was that a 5-1? Do you know, Carolina? Was the county council add back, was that a 5-1?
1 May.
When it, yeah. Okay.
There's lots of stuff we can do, just nice good sandwiches
Mhm.
between the sage and.
Be careful about running your hands under hot water. Risk management, that's what we need right now. Yeah,
Oh, right.
I appreciated your comments about the risk management and the HR thing. It's a hard thing, it feels like sometimes to justify it, and until you realize what they do to
Yeah,
keep the county
I have an HR director,
safe.
so I understand,
Yeah.
you know, the things that he's going through and the meetings that we have, how complicated things are on timing, execution, paperwork.
Yeah.
It's,
And it's interesting because it's like, yeah, it's bureaucracy, but it's also humans who have
That's the right one, Ken?
troubles.
Yeah.
And we see both of those.
yeah, it's
So
a
it's a
big job.
special breed of people. I
Yep.
think.
Sorry, I had to run across really quick. I just wanted to get for the other two items, just for efficiency.
We've got community requests and personnel requests, and then back to the share. Is that?
I'm not ready, I'll be ready to
Yeah.
come back. But the one, there were a few items that I mentioned earlier that I wanted to add to the list.
Oh, okay. Okay.
And the problem with, sometimes where I have things open in so many different places that
Yeah.
what I printed wasn't necessarily.
Well, Ken, the other
Are we
day
still
we were
going?
preparing for the first remand hearing, and there was also all the draft guidance from the governor's office.
They
I
did.
hovered over Acrobat or whatever, the Adobe, and this giant list
Are you
shot up.
kidding?
Oh my goodness.
Now like my mind.
And half of them, just had the date. So it was like, it could be governor, it
Oh,
could
and
be trail.
I can hear Ken during board sessions.
I think she just had a phone call that was, yeah.
I didn't even throw it off.
See, Mary, I got it when we got
I thought, 5 minutes while everybody was grabbing their lunch.
Yeah.
You know better than that.
I don't know
We've
what I
done
was
this enough
thinking.
years.
I know. That's okay. Nobody can see you, right?
You don't have a microphone either.
Can they watch us? Oh, that's wonderful.
Okay,
So Ken or Denny, chair, or Ken, which one are we addressing next?
I think we're going through the community requests.
Or if I may, because as I mentioned before, I had a couple items that I did want to discuss or add to the list. And that's why I ran across the street. And I would be okay, maybe I just give the overview on them, we put them on the list, and then when he steps in, or we can,
Got it.
Okay.
Perfect.
So
He's just getting started.
So the first one that I wanted to throw out there and get feedback on, during yesterday's presentation on insurance reserve Fund 80, we had some discussions about with that reserve for the future being at 3.7 million. And recognizing the times that we're in right now, the challenges, if there's any aspect or discussion about doing a transfer of a portion of those funds back to the fund. And essentially, because most of it has to do with general liability, that we would put it back out to departments, which there's a whole other piece to it, because if it goes back to the general fund, it would not go to Fund 10 department, but that money would go into 1002, which then would be in the general reserve instead of locked up in the insurance reserve. Which is, it's actually, I'd really like that.
Yeah.
And then those departments that are non-general fund would be getting, they're based on their percentage that they pay in the liability, they'd be getting a percentage of that amount that would be recorded as an internal revenue. They'd be essentially getting a credit that may help them, especially, and I can give you some, it really depends on I have a formula that's set up that, and I would probably, out of that 3.7 million, I would more than likely lean for the recommendation of around the one, 1.5, not necessarily the full 3.7, because we have in previous years been trying to build the insurance reserve if we ever decided, if the decision was ever made, or if we ever had to go self-insured for our insurance portfolio, that we really want to build that fund up. Again, I'm throwing that out there as a number. I have a tendency to be, very reluctant to, I want to keep some funds in Fund 80 in that reserve for the future, because I think we'll need it.
Sure.
In that insurance reserve, but I'm thinking, I just want to throw it out there if there's an amount or if there's interest by the committee to do that.
I know, Ken, I think it's a good idea because what we've been done lately in the way we're managing our insurance portfolio, I don't know if that's going to be needed. I think we should do some in there. We have 1.5 million, but I think one of the things I'd like to see the commission do in the future, if we'd like to do that, is come up with a policy so we're not sitting here every year that says, okay, we're going to maintain our insurance reserve like at 1.5 million. So then if we do that, unless something special happens, that we will always have the directions to maintain that reserve at 1.5. So if we get up to 1.8 or 1.9, that gives staff and it being approved by the board easier way to use some of that money. So I think if we capped it at either 1.5 million or 1 million, because I think this is the year to make some of the differences. We'll do that.
Well, because keeping in mind one of the reasons we have the fund that we have now, and the last 3 years, positive. That's really the only reason. And so we're not being on this retro plan. We haven't had any large claims, that we've had to spend all of the general liability funds that we have budgeted there. We've had those cost savings at the end of the year because we're only paying 60% of the premium, not paying 60% of the premium and then for a major claim. So that's why that number can be a little difficult. But I agree.
I would probably not take that much out at this point. You could have several good years, but sometimes there's something about your due. And maybe you could look at it as each year that we get a good report, we could draw that down, but maybe not to go off where we're all of a sudden pulling funds from the general fund because we've had some rough year. I mean, you kind of want to go with what your plan was, and I'm sure your risk manager would probably agree that he'd probably like to keep more in there. So I would just recommend maybe 2 million to be your baseline to start with. Just my
He's the
recommendation.
insurance guy. I don't argue with him.
I was gonna say, I
Well-
have no experience in this.
My comfort level was with moving back to departments or to 1002 edition was my thought was 1.5 million because that's essentially 1% of the annual budget. So it leaves a little bit more than your recommendation, but I'm happy to go with your thoughts too. I get it. Yeah, it's they do say it's not a matter of if but when, but sometimes it's not actually true. Just gonna, they say that about Cascadia, and we could have it now or we could never experience it in our lifetime. So
Okay, on that, come up with the amount. We have to make a motion. The budget committee make motion to allow you to do that, or can that be done by consensus?
I would ask for, because this is gonna result in the change in
Yeah.
the budget, because I'll essentially, based on the amount that's in the motion, I'm gonna be that into a transfer line and transferring, and it's gonna be changing several funds.
Mhm. Yeah.
Just so you have an idea, I was complaining about not having too many spreadsheets open at once. Just a few minutes ago. Um, Don't mean to get into this. Is there interest in knowing what that breakout's going to look like, or are you just comfortable doing a motion with a set amount and then I'll make it happen?
I'm comfortable with that.
I'm comfortable with
Yeah.
that.
I would like to see it, but I don't need to see it right now.
Right.
I'm happy to answer specific questions afterwards once I actually build the formula.
Totally. Sounds great to me. Yeah.
So I guess I'd make a motion to the budget committee that we maintain our insurance reserves at $2 million.
Second.
Well, I want to be very careful on how we state that, because insurance reserve, because they're talking about fund 80 insurance reserve for the future line.
So I could, do you want to amend, it's
No, you go ahead.
8094 would be the GL, right?
I'll amend my motion to put 8094. Yeah.
To drop that to 2 million, so I'd be taking the 1.7 million and transferring. that.
Right.
And I second that.
All right.
Thank you.
So I have a motion and a second. So the motion is to set the level of the fund 8094 to $2 million. Period. Is there any more discussion, or do I need to discuss anything about what's going to happen? Okay. All right. All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? That's unanimous. All right. Ken, was there anything else in that that you wanted to jump into right now?
Second one, and this is much smaller now. Actually, at this point, I think I might just leave it as status quo in the budget for right now. And it would be supplemental this year for budget. It's only $145,000, but it's fine sitting in a reserve account. So, and what I'm referring to, there was that small account that I mentioned, that there's a small extra reserve of $45,000. Because continue to sit in a reserve. It's one that I think eventually, I do want to transfer that out of there, but that one's a much more complicated formula and put it out and positive. It's more administrative than it is benefit.
Let's keep our powder dry because we're going to need it.
The other thing that I had here, and I know that there wasn't talk about retirement and things like that, there really wasn't talk about career budget. And that's a fund that, and there was another one that I was speaking with Ken Friday this morning. we do, Ken and I have talked about this quite a bit, and we do have concerns, but we didn't do it in the past during the presentation. And so I would like to make the ask now that I really think because there's statutory requirements that we have to have a surveyor. And we have challenges. I think we were fortunate on Bill Gillies, one of his retirements being available and having that surveyor license.
Yeah.
And what I'd like to do is make a request for an 80,000 of general fund, and I'm not saying we're gonna spend it, but I want to be able to increase the discretionary allocation to the surveyor's budget. So Ken Friday has the ability to go and do a recruitment for a surveyor. Now, whether that's a full-time surveyor or a half-time surveyor, we believe we have some funds in the budget, but we just want to have plenty of appropriations to get these exercises. And Ken and I have also had some discussions, and I've talked to Christian about this too. We also have, it's not just for surveyor, there's some additional duties or responsibilities, some areas that I think this position could absorb that there's a need, and it has to do with property management.
Yeah.
We have a lot of property in foreclosure. We have there's a lot of county properties. There is a certain amount of relation, because whether, the surveyor is usually involved when it comes to any county, historically, any county property transactions anyways, to go out and do the surveys and get us descriptions and to do that. And so we're trying to do some outside the box thinking, because we have recognized historically there wasn't necessarily a full-time amount of work, but we do think that there's some additional work or some ideas out there. And I think it would be, we have to have a surveyor. And so I just wanted to put that out there as a request. I'm basically asking for a $80,000 request, 80,000 in discretionary funds to go to the surveyor's budget to allow it sufficient appropriation authority for him to go out and do it.
So right now, as far as what's earmarked for that, is there any, what's that amount?
We have right now between what is budgeted for the part-time position and the extra help, it's split between corner restoration and surveyor. I want to say it's about 14,000
Total?
total.
Can you say that again? Sorry.
14,000
For all surveyor.
for extra help
Oh.
and for what was in the part-time. Because remember, Bill Gilly, that was a pretty small amount. It was in 0.2.
Yeah.
It was 0.02. I mean, it was a point,
Right, 12,000. Yeah, between the 0.05 and the extra help.
Okay.
Well, I think that my opinion is because I guess that's somebody like losing somebody like Bill. He had the knowledge and he had everything. Now you don't have him anymore. What do you do? But I think like the corner restoration, and especially when we have to do, or should do surveys when we bring a piece of property into the county to sell and possess. I think that is pretty critical. I do think by having a full-time surveyor's budget, that we could actually, without the full amount, we could actually do a lot of that. And I think we should.
And I guess the other part that I would add, Ken has done a lot of looking for options. We even looked at like partnering with neighboring counters that have kind of can we split a surveyor or share, but that hasn't worked out. The other issue that we kind of run into is if we have a contracted surveyor, if we hire somebody on contract and do that, and that's going to be somebody local who now is going to be in the dilemma that how do they, they can't sign off on their own word.
Yeah.
They could be, potential conflicts of interest and isn't able to sign off on, or, you know, so
Yeah.
it's something, it's a dilemma that we have, and we need to address that.
And I've seen that with the contract, the surveyor challenge. I'm uncomfortable with that. I want to have somebody who we all know and knows that everybody views them as independent.
So the current is Mr. Glass. I can't remember his first name.
Right.
Marty Glass. Yeah,
Yep.
nice guy.
Yep.
What is his?
He's a tech.
He's a tech, so he's
Yeah.
not is he not or he's a licensed surveyor, just
He's a
not.
surveying tech, but he doesn't have the full licensing or credentials to
Okay.
sign off on plats. You know, Bill Gilly has to review his work and sign off on his work.
Makes sense. Okay.
And we're not looking at doing any changes, you know, because Marty's doing a great job.
I think so too.
And we think they're, between the corner restoration and the survey work, and if we start looking at property management or some other areas that we can have this position work on, we think there's sufficient work.
You need a motion?
Yes.
I would move that we make that transfer and appropriation to the surveyor's budget.
Second. Thank you, Mayor.
All right. More discussion. We have motion to move $80,000 discretionary to the surveyor's budget. All in favor?
Hi.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, motion passes.
Thank you, Ken, for bringing
That's
that.
good.
Thank you.
And those were the additional department ones that I had.
That's it. So we're going to move into community requests. First one being CASA. Additional funding currently at 4,000, asking for an additional 2. Is that correct? And that's,
I believe that's correct.
that's what. Is there any discussion?
I'll just say that we approved this last year at the same amounts. They historically had 2,000 and budgeted 1039 of the discretionary funds that we're giving. We've been getting cheaper.
Here's the question I have, much like the question that Mary has. What's statistics, what do we know that additional 2,000 is going to be spent for? I mean, how do we judge?
Well, I have to say, and I'm kind of biased here, but that we don't ever have enough causes for kids that are in foster care. So in our county, there are always kids who are sort of out there without that representation. And I do think that the organization is standing in the gap for these kids when they're in foster care. Fortunately, we had been seeing fewer kids going into care, but that's not the case now. And I think after this COVID situation, we're seeing child abuse cases are rising, neglect and abuse. So we're going to have more kids in care. I'm concerned about, I would love to see their funding, the existing funding remain. But as far as all of these requests, I'm concerned whether or not there's any wisdom in funding any of them to the degree that they're asking, or even at all, because we just have so many core functions of government that need to be funded. I'm concerned about just going forward. Every one of these is wonderful, but do we have the money? Does it make sense?
I share your concern, and I would have brought that up if you hadn't.
So how do you say to CASA, if we had the money, I'd love to fund them to twice as much so they can get every kid represented. I don't know how we split the baby here on any of these. Every one of them is wonderful, but can we do it now?
Well, I think there's certain ones in there to me, like the Fifth Corner Academy. I could never go for moving that one at all, $50,000. Because I'm not even so sure they are an academy or they're certified with state OED or whatever. So that one would be easy for me. You take out, matter of fact, your community mediators, I think, is another case, for a year. And when I was with the city and the county system, they say, well, we sort of had so many recommended by the sheriff's department, and so many recommended. You go to the sheriff's department and say, well, we didn't recommend those, and I think that's one that really concerns me most of anybody. Because I think your community media probably does a pretty good job of mediation, but we don't know what they're doing. I mean, we don't know at all. Are they serving nobody that's recommended by the sheriff? Are they serving one? Are they serving, and it's an organization with a lot of problems. But I think, Mary, you make a good point that I think there's certain ones, and myself personally, there's certain ones that I would definitely not do, and there's other ones I would do it probably a reduced amount.
Is there,
Can I really quick correct the typo?
Please.
I don't, am I gonna do one for today?
You've already used it.
It's actually CASA, their request is for 2,000, their base amount is 4,000.
It's 4.
Right.
Now, but I will say that when we built the budget, this was prior to receiving any requests, so the 6,000 was already, not to say that it's still subject to approval. If it's not approved, we'll change that amount and back that, but we did build 1039's budget with the 6,000 based on
Okay.
what they've got.
So it's a renewal, in essence.
But if the
It's a
committee doesn't
2,000.
approve it, we
Yeah.
would reduce that in the budget. I don't want that other than to say that we already balanced the budget based on what they
Right.
received last year is what we
Right.
budgeted, which was 6,000.
And they're asking for an additional 2.
No, they're asking for renewal, technically, right?
renewal of the 6 that
Right,
we?
renewal of the 6.
It gets confusing.
Yeah.
Why does it have,
Yeah, because we raised, or sorry, Commissioners Stira and Olson raised it in 1819, looks like. from-
yeah, it was 4.
Yeah.
Then it was 6. But why do they have, why is its general fund request 2? If we've,
It's not.
The request is 2,000. It's a general fund request because there are several of these that have been funded with general fund, not from, because a lot of these.
Oh,
are
I see what you're saying.
operational
Okay.
support. So we've
Mhm.
historically funded with general fund, not with ONC, not
Okay.
with the licensure. none of those other funds.
So we technically, the spreadsheet says that, that is currently funded at $4,000. But it's currently funded at 6,000.
It's currently funded at 6.
Mhm. And that's, I couldn't remember which page I looked around. It's page 129 is what the CASA and your community mediators are both on.
Correct. Page 129 has the ones that Commissioner. That's the budget.
Well, I would support keeping the funding the same because I do agree with Commissioner Starrett that the need is going up, especially right now. So I don't support necessarily an increase, but if it's the same as last year, then that's something I would support.
I didn't agree.
then I would make a motion to approve we don't really have to. And I guess what we have to do then is
We
to,
should, yeah.
We should.
we
Let's
should,
just,
or just actually for the,
Approving the same.
but we're,
You're continuing it?
we're continuing the $6,000 contribution from last year.
So one thought along those lines though, Ken, you were saying, oh, we should do something, but it's already actually in the budget. So when we go to approve the budget or accept it or all the steps that we take here, that would include it, right?
I would probably recommend just making the motion.
Okay.
And just saying that
And then the total of $6,000.
your motion could be just like Commissioner Olson just said,
Okay.
approve $6,000.
Oh, yeah, okay.
Or continuing the $6,000.
There you go.
I'll make that motion.
Second.
All right, we have a motion and a second. All in favor of continuing the funding of $6,000 to CASA, signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed? Passes. Okay.
we are now at 102.
Oh, so we need to take a break for,
I at least have to step out for sure.
Do we want to keep going? Or do you?
Do you have any strong comments on any?
In terms of the rest of the community, requests. I'm not inclined to support any of them right now for some of the same reasons that Commissioner Starrett talked about, where, we're just not sure what is going to happen with the budget going forward. So, and I agree with Commissioner Olson that I did some looking into the therapeutic charter school, and they're not a charter school. They have no sponsor. So it's really kind of a brand new idea, and that's a lot of money to commit to a brand new idea. Even though I support a recovery high school, that's just, it wouldn't be fiscally prudent for us to do that. So I would not be inclined to vote for any of these just based on our financial situation that we're in right now.
Going back
Yeah,
to,
well,
okay. Is there, so we've discussed the state making a mandate here shortly of the 8.5 to 17%. Is that what were the big rock that could be
Right.
coming up? I mean, not to kick the can down the road, but would finding out that none of that was to come to happen, would that change our feelings on any of these?
Possibly.
Oh,
well, I
sure.
think that and the
That's
fact
a good
that
question.
until we have answers on what FEMA, if they cut that,
So
from
that's where I'm,
what's
is
FEMA gonna do? I mean, those are the two big pieces, what the state's gonna do and what we would qualify under FEMA and the other federal programs. And until we have those numbers, I have trouble with any of them until we have those numbers.
that's where I'm going.
I
Is-
think
is-
I think I'm there too.
I
That's where
think
I'm at.
I feel that from everybody. Is that a way to, is there a way to say we would address these at a,
Well, you'd have
date
to
or
be
just
before
kick it
first of
to-
July, wouldn't it?
yeah, that's what I'm saying. Should we say we need to, there's too much unknowns right now that if we have to make a decision, we're going to go here, but subject to some things changing, it may paint a different
Well,
picture.
this goes back to what we've been talking about. These are new expenses when we know our income is going to drop. So, I mean, it just doesn't make logical sense at this point to, in my opinion, to move forward on any of them.
You know, I think I'd like to revisit some,
Yeah.
of them.
If
When we have more firm information, we maybe get the budget committee
Yeah.
back together.
I mean,
Because
I'm
think we'll be
completely
in such
open
a-
to
we'll
coming back on,
Have to do it probably in June anyway,
I
based,
mean,
whatever the answers are. gonna
Yeah,
have to do it.
I would be open to that also.
at this point, we don't even know if we're going to have economic dollars for Subport to manage and hand out in grant form. So, I mean, it's just, there's so much uncertainty right now.
And this is a delay doesn't necessarily mean a denial of any of these. It just get, right now, can we just say that we're not going to make these decisions until we have a better forecast?
I'd
If
like to hear
that's,
from
if
Ken.
if the concern, because I would point out historically, these community requests are gonna come out of landfill license reserve relevancy. for
Yeah.
the most part. There are a couple there's a couple more that may be general fund as well.
Mhm.
Which is not, those are funds that we have not historically used for, as a contingency or as a reserve.
Yeah.
or For operations, county operations. And my thought would be is if you as the committee are not wanting to take action on the individual requests, what I would then, maybe the discussion should be is if you look at the landfill license reserve and the O&C fund, and we can go to the specific pages
Yeah.
for each of those budgets. The other part would be is how much of those do you want to hold into an expense line
Mhm.
that could potentially fund those for a later decision on funding for individual ones,
Yeah.
or how much of those you want to lock up in a reserve for the future. We've had some projects come up this year where landfill license reserve was something that we looked at as a board, and I
Yeah.
had to, sorry, we can't, it's all in reserve.
It's all
for the
reserved, yeah.
future. We'd have to do a supplemental budget, or we'd have to take a bunch of additional stuff to get into it. So the other discussion would be is if you're not ready to act on each of these requests,
and instead look at those balances, maybe we could hold landfill license reserve or a percentage of that in the general expense line that can be available for later awards. And ONC, I believe we've held all of that in the grant.
I think, yeah.
And I'll verify.
Yeah, and I think that's a good point. Some of the services we may not want to give out as many grants next year, maybe no, another year without any grants, and determine that that money would be better spent filling some of these community needs and giving out grants. But we don't have that number, we don't really know that.
I think that Ken's suggestion about putting it, I'm just looking at, I was flipping through trying to find ONC fund, but I was not able to, but I'm on landfill license reserve. And I think that adding some of the revenue, or sorry, some of the ending balance to the awards granted line, which is 38,056,700.27, would be a really smart move, because then we actually can use the money.
What do you have for landfill reserve? Casey, I'm not.
Oh, it's page
Page
42.
42.
Yeah, landfill license reserve.
Well, just read it to me.
Oh, yeah. So the total, the beginning balance is 716,000. The ending balance is 781,238, which I think is actually, oh yeah, it's on your,
Yeah, it's right there.
it's on
And
your
how about,
grid.
where do we sit in ONC again? That's
I don't-
It's 432,
If we're-
904.
Just one modification or recommendation.
Yeah.
I wouldn't necessarily put the funds and grants awarded.
Oh, okay.
That's typically where we record actual grants have been awarded.
Got it.
I would hold it in that other expense, even though I've been trying to go away from that other expense line.
You have been.
But in this case, it makes sense because we don't have an identified purpose. We have a list of requests that may come or, but we haven't identified anything. Whereas if we haven't reported these grants awarded, that means that we're awarding a grant to someone.
Right. And we can put a footnote on other expenses even, right? That
Right.
it gives a little bit of an explanation.
And are we wanting to put the full amount, the full ask, or do we want to make a decision now that if we were to award it, what it would be, or is that contingent on knowing what our situation is going to be?
I would defer till we know more.
Okay.
I mean, I support many of these. Gospel Rescue Mission, Family Place, these are all outstanding places, but I just don't feel comfortable.
Supporter of them, but on the other hand, though, is whether we do, but and then when we come back, our next situation, we can say, okay, any of them, are we gonna support with their full ask? Are we gonna give half of their ask? Well, you know, what are we gonna give them, so.
But are we going to take any off the table just right now? Have we determined that there are
I
a
think the
couple?
only one we took CASA off the table.
Oh, that's true. And your community meteors.
And the charter school?
Yeah, I think we
and
can
the
take that
charge
off.
So we take them out, and then did we have a consensus to take the,
If I could, I would move by consensus if we're not.
Yeah.
gonna
Oh.
fund or if we're not gonna do something, I would recommend that you put a
Motion,
in-
Okay.
yeah.
in action on this.
Okay.
Yeah.
Specific items.
And I think, the therapeutic charter school, for example, might be a good one to have as, where they can come back and do a request, mid-year, because it sounds like with a pending request to sponsor, they're still at an uncertain juncture.
Maybe go
Yeah.
down the road a little bit. further
Yeah.
and see what's
Right.
going on.
So we could, I guess, motion could say that the ones we've taken off the table, CASA and the fifth quarter academy, which we've already talked about, we could take those off the table because we've already decided CASA was going to get what they were funded at
right?
last year, and we decided not to fund it this time, fifth quarter academy.
And what about the comfort dogs? Would that be
Well, I think
something?
they'd be one of those that came back.
Okay, I mean, but take it off this.
No, what I'm saying is the only two we'd take off this list is CASA and fifth quarter academy.
Well, from my perspective, since this is where we're suggesting that we put some budgetary authority into, or there's been a suggestion that we put budgetary authority into the other expense line of the landfill license reserve. it seems like, especially given the challenges with presenting the information to us, that I would recommend that we don't remove anybody from this list, but rather make it clear to the community that we are holding off on awarding funds to public requests, but that we will open it up in the future to public requests. Does that make sense? Because winning the list down and then holding on to it,
No,
the
agree.
canine comfort dogs, they might just go and find funding somewhere else, or that.
Well, from the community requests, I think
Mhm.
what I would like to know is go back 3 to 4 years. And some of these are, say, repeats from like Juliet's house year before, year before. I would like to know the last 4 years.
Yeah.
What each one of those organizations have got. Because that could go into our decision on
Into
what
that
we're
decision.
funding at this year.
The more information,
I like that.
we may need to ask Ken to do that.
Yeah, I was kind of suggesting to him.
He's busy though right now.
So
I know
the,
he's busy.
so we have the mission, we have
The ones that are on the community requests, Ken,
family place.
what I'd like to have, since we're holding all these in advance, what I'd like to know is the last like 4 years, what each one of those organizations, if they have received
If they've come before,
funds in the last 4 years,
just a history.
what year they were on, and what we gave them.
So family place, we have mediators, gospel mission, Juliet's house, homeward bound. Pretty much all of these are, and cause everybody else has been here except
Comfort.
Comfort Canines and Fifth Corner.
I hope that isn't too hard for you to get.
I know that you did something similar with the mission last
Yeah,
year.
we did have a
because we had a big
printout of
ask.
the
And, yeah.
prior years with the mission.
Right, and then,
Was it last year we didn't give any?
And Family
we didn't
Place,
give anything
was it the year before we gave them 150,000? Is that the year
And
before?
then last year was 100. Yeah.
Year before that? Yeah.
All right. Hopefully Justin is watching and writing this down.
I'll remind you again. Yeah, because I
All right,
think the
so
more
do we have-
information we have to make those decisions at a later time, like recommendations on the landfill reserve and the ONC reserve,
Mhm.
will help us better decide what we want to fund and at what level.
And I've noticed that Sheriff is on, and that he had a thought on the comfort canines, but we can also just get him to weigh in when we're
Yeah.
ready as well.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So do we have a motion for the remaining 11 items? Oh, there's no 2. No 6.
9,
We're missing some. So the remaining item.
all the community requests.
I got 6 is what I counted.
I don't even think we have to put the number to say of the request.
7, no?
8.
There's 9 on the list, and you came up with 6, Casey.
But we got rid of CASA
I came up with 6 that we haven't taken action on already.
Yes, we got rid of costs.
and Parkway Committee.
Have we taken action for reserve and emotion?
Yes.
Only on CASA.
Only on costs.
Did we not do it for your community years?
No.
Oh,
No,
okay.
we just talked.
Right. Hey, that's what they do.
So I'd say other than costs, everything.
Parkway's gone, right? Parkway, we already made a
We've already
decision about that.
So I could make a motion
Okay, go for it.
that so did we ever, we agreed to, no, we haven't moved on your community mediators. Okay. Okay, well, I would move that we hold the funding at our current funding level, annual funding level for your community mediators, which I believe is $12,000.
I don't necessarily agree with that, so.
I would agree
We
with
should
Commissioner
discuss it.
Olson, just to
Okay.
put this on the list for a revisit.
Okay.
I would
I think
agree.
everybody
Yeah.
other than CASA.
Mhm.
should go
Did
on
we-
for the revisit.
I thought we did make a motion to not go from 40 to 50.
We did on the park.
We did
On the-
that.
on the
Yeah.
So
part.
that
Okay.
one would come off.
Okay, I could do an amended emotion.
Not that I have
Amended,
to do it,
amended.
Go for it.
Group
Amended.
speaks.
Amend your
Yeah.
motion.
I will amend the motion that the community funding requests from Homeward Bound, Juliet's House, the Mission, Your Community Mediators, Comfort Canines, A Family Place, and a Fifth Corner Academy be denied now, but reconsidered at a later date. Is that how we want to do it?
we're not really denying, we're just reconsidering.
Yeah, we're reconsidering them.
Are you denying for those that are current, have historically been funded? Are you denying the increases or are you denying funding?
Based upon at least two commissioners' thoughts, they wanted to hold off on those.
On any fund.
Yeah.
Any kind of-
Well, I thought we were going to keep the, what are we
CASA
talking
we're
about?
keeping.
CASA, we're keeping the
Whoops.
existing $6,000,
Yeah.
correct?
Yes.
Yes.
And you
Okay.
excluded that from. the
And I
motion.
excluded that.
So,
The
But
one
Commissioner
that I'm
Olson and
seeing is-
Starrett wanted to wait on and consider the Your Community Meters as part of a future reconsideration.
Historically, they've been funded at 12,000.
Yeah.
That's in the budget. And
oh, okay.
And that's why I motioned before, but
Yeah. I just wanted to make.
I
sure
tabled
I
that motion.
understood What the motion, because it gives us
Yeah.
instructions. Are we not writing a check?
I made a motion for that, but then I amended it based upon what I was hearing from the
All right, so
board.
Commissioner Stare and
Sorry, my
Commissioner
question
Olson.
Probably complicated the whole motion.
No, it didn't.
No.
No, but you did state that it was already in the budget, which I think kind of got us all.
That's a good remark. Do we want to,
That's why I made my
Well,
original motion.
My problem with some of these, like, if we hold them at the regular level, that we begin every year. Maybe now we have better programs or different programs that are more, can take more advantage of that money. So I would leave it in their budget, but until we can act on it, because I think there's a lot of organizations I see on the list that could use it probably more than community mediators. Maybe that's just because my trust in community mediators isn't real high, but
so what you're saying then is basically we leave, we're budgeted for it, but we just don't disperse it.
Well, it's in the budget
It is
as
in
long
the
as,
budget.
unless the motion changes the budget.
To take it out.
Right. My original motion was to leave the 12,000 in the budget, but not increase it to 15,000, which I believe was the ask was
15.
The
Was
ask is
15
for-
for 3 additional. Yeah.
I could, I don't like it, but I could sure buy into that.
I could go for that.
Yeah, I can, okay, and not
I'm
do
okay
the
with that,
additional.
Casey. Now you
Okay.
can get it back to normal.
Okay, that sounds good.
Start over again.
All right,
Uh,
Amendment 2.
And I know that at least the work of some of the folks within it that are all volunteers
Yeah, they
in juvenile detention is quite amazing. I know that they're not actually doing necessarily YCM,
Well,
but
since we didn't second your motion, why don't you drop your motion, make a new motion? 'Cause it wasn't there.
Go back to your original.
okay, I'm going to go back to my original
There you go.
motion. I move that we deny the increase of $3,000 for you community mediators.
No, we postponed. Oh, no, we're denying it.
I'll
because
second.
We are giving.
I'll second the motion.
I would give you a high five, but we're not supposed
All
to.
right, so we're going to do this one individually.
No, we're just doing that one.
There's nothing else tied to this one.
There's nothing else.
All right, so we have a
We're just denying the 3,000 additional.
We have a motion to deny the additional $3,000 to your community mediators, but leaving their current funding that is in the budget of $12,000 as it is.
Yes.
All in favor?
Aye.
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 Opposed? All right.
Way to
Motion
add to
passes.
that one. Good job.
All right. All right. So now we have
The rest.
the rest.
And I can
Go ahead.
do another motion that is that we hold off from now in making any decisions
On all of
on
them.
it until we have more clarity with the budget.
Yes, I like that.
Okay.
Postpone,
Yeah.
postpone deliberation on,
Okay. And then I can also make another motion after that when we have a discussion about putting some funding authority into the other expense line.
You know, part of it could be, I don't know if we necessarily need to take action on the request, and no action is no action.
Oh yeah.
I guess no.
Yeah.
That's true.
Okay.
Well,
Take no action. It's
But-
done.
If they call in, I'm sure they're going to reach out and say, hey, how did this
If you
go?
wanna do it-
What is the,
If you
I,
want to batch them together and say we're not.
I would
gonna
think
take
it'd be a-
action, and then-
I think that's the.
for the
plan.
community, it might sound better if
Take
we
forever.
we
Yeah.
took this action.
okay. Well, do you want me to try the motion? out?
Yes.
Try it out for size? Okay.
Walk it out.
We'll tell you if it's wrong.
Yeah, I know you will. That's what, I'm actually just going to look at Commissioner Sayer while I do this.
Lucky you, pass the
Um,
notes.
And I don't mean to make light of this. This is really serious stuff with funding and requests from really good organizations. But
Yes.
so I move that, given the uncertainty in state and federal budgets, causing uncertainty for our own revenues from the state and the federal, that we postpone making decisions on the community request for funding from Homeward Bound, Juliet's House, Union Gospel Rescue Mission, Comfort Canines, A Family Place, and Fifth Quarter Academy until a later date when we have more certainty.
Second,
All right. So we have a motion to postpone the remaining community requests until a later date. All in favor?
aye.
Opposed? Passes.
All right. Way to go,
Poor
teamwork.
kids over there. It's like, what are we saying? You're a little tired of budgeting, huh?
Oh, I can't get highway budget.
Nope. That's what you did.
It's my
You
life.
chose it.
This is my life.
You chose it and they chose you. So
Right. The other part that I think would be good to circle back to, I'm kind of frustrated because I can't find ONC fund. And if it was in the budget book, it would be great.
It's-
I would flip right to it.
isn't it in here?
It
It
is-
is in there, but I
Yeah.
wouldn't be able to find it.
And whenever, I typically can kind of turn right to it.
I mean, I already looked at it today.
Maybe if you want to take a look at 30, on page 42, landfill license reserve, I just want to make sure that based on the discussions that you're having about potentially postponing community requests or the project.
Yeah.
Maybe we can start with Fund 38 on how, do a motion and approve how much of that 779,267 that you would like to move to other expense for potential future projects. All of it, a portion of it.
I'm comfortable with doing half of it, but
I
I'm
mean,
not comfortable.
I think leaving some in there, just from the years I've been here, leaving some in there for these community, even at half or just put a $250,000 minimum in there that stays.
Yeah,
For
because
that.
we know we have to keep the payback on the interfund.
Yeah.
Transfers, that has to stay under the license fee. And then the auditing purposes, administrative overhead. So,
And would be at 131, page 131, possibly, for ONC. Yeah, 131. So this is, I'm sorry, this is separate from my discussion about.
we're
landfill
talking
license.
about the license reserve.
I figure we go one at a time.
Yeah,
Yeah.
but now you have it.
So if we left 500,000 in there, or is that not enough? Or is that too much? Are you thinking that's too much?
I was thinking half of 779, but is to move, or 781, to move to the other expense. And, to be honest, I'm not as concerned about what the total is for these particular community requests, but because I don't know how long the tail is on whatever kind of, recovery we have
Yeah.
and what groups might need it in order to
Yeah.
finish a project, for
Right.
example, that we might
I feel
need.
comfortable if we left 350,000 in there, which would mean 369,000 we would take out. Because, we say we don't have any big problem with land license agreement. For those you don't know. Okay, let's take one. So I would say we leave in 350,000 and move 369,000.
All but 350,000
50,000.
out of reserve for the other expense.
I think right now it's just in an ending balance rather than a reserve.
Yeah, I keep calling it.
Yeah.
It's a landfill license reserve.
Oh, yeah. That's,
Well, then I'd make a motion that we move out or transfer $369,112 from the landfill license reserve to, what was the other one where we move it, Ken?
Other.
expense.
To other expense.
Second.
All right, so we have a motion to bring the landfill reserve down to $350,000, moving $369,112
To other expense.
to other expense. All in favor?
aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Passes.
O&C fund, which is 131. Ken maybe had some comments on it. Right now, it appears that we have all of it expensed. Yeah, budget as expenses.
So I don't think we'll have to take any action.
Yeah. Yeah, there's 470,000 in the other expense line. And this is where Rick and Denny, I don't know how much you paid attention to these things, but this is where we transferred funds from this year, this fiscal year, to 1026, the Economic Development Fund, to fund 250,000 of small business immediate relief grants.
Oh, that's where this
Oh,
came
okay.
from.
That we're in the
I
process
did hear
of
about it,
dispersing.
but I didn't know where
Yeah.
it came from.
Yeah, I thought
Yeah.
you should know.
Yeah.
Because we didn't have enough funding in the Economic Development Fund on its own.
Yeah, because technically, I'd say probably half, maybe 3/4 of the counties use their O&C funds for things like this, maybe 1/3 of them actually use it for operations. And we don't use any of our O&C funds for operations.
Since they're,
That's what we've always done,
Yeah.
landfill reserve is what we've always done for the community.
well, since there's not a need to move it.
All right. So what is,
Next item is
Sheriff's office.
Oh, yeah.
oh,
Do you have a better sense of how the budget?
But I didn't do anything else on the slides.
I know.
and you did a good job too, Mr. Heffel.
So why don't we start with the jail? So the jail, 1041, in order to balance our numbers, it resulted in a request for $131,345. And the sheriff submitted several memos to accompany those requests, and then this morning submitted an additional memo to clarify some of the, if you remember, we had a discussion about beginning balance, revision, if you wanted to make the beginning balance. Sheriff, are you available on Teams?
Yep, I'm here.
All right.
I only see a 12th man up there.
Do you want to, I don't know,
Oh, they got, put back at the 12th man.
what does the committee, I'm sorry, I kind of threw it to the sheriff without checking. You know, so from what I'm seeing, there was a change that resulted in 135,000 being added to the beginning balance reserve and 100,000 being added to the beginning balance
So that's a $235,000 change in the budget, with 135,000 of the expense being recorded as presented yesterday. It's going to be split between drugs and professional services. Which
Only the
then-
sheriff gets to put drugs in the budget. I
His
just wanna
expense
acknowledge.
line.
Which then results in where we end up. I think you had budgeted a 0 ending balance. But now we have $100,000 of potential ending,
Increase.
because with the increase, the additional 100,000 that went on the beginning balance.
And the 131,345 is already included in the budget,
Correct.
in the budget that's built.
Correct.
Okay.
So then that results in an additional 100,000, or do you need the full, I have to ask a question, or do you need the full 131,345?
So, what I ended up doing, I'm not sure why, but I keep getting that though, so. But now.
Well, we can-
You sound great to us, Sheriff.
Okay, here we go. So, I have my team in here telling me to turn off the YouTube link.
Yeah, that's.
So basically, when we entered the original budget, we used the initial discretionary allocation that Ken provided to us in January. And then after we had the conversation of transferring that FTE out of our jail fund into 1086, we made that request to transfer, but I never took that dollar amount off the discretionary allocation, like Ken did, which is the way it should have been. So when we had the shortage, it was based off of the different allocations. So we take the numbers that you provided to us, Ken, yesterday, and I give you a new discretionary allocation number, and then I change because we're anticipating to be able to bring in closer to 635 as an ending balance this year. If we increase our beginning balance by 100,000, and we earmark that 135 for the MAT grant, then that would give us an ending balance, a budgeted ending balance of 100,000 with our existing discretionary allocation and our existing revenues, with no need for additional discretionary allocation.
That's what I've got here too. So maybe I'm not correct.
And in regards to the patrol side, all that does is give us an additional 50,000 in revenue. So if people ask the 570 some thousand was added, then that would just give us a budgeted ending balance of 50,000.
Oh, wow, okay.
So the jail asked for balance that budget to make us whole is not needed with this additional revenue anticipated, but on the patrol side, you would still need at least 520,000.
But the 570 would give you 50,000 ending balance.
Correct.
Sheriff, one question. So the 131 that we have currently on our add back request, that's already in your budget, right?
Yes, it is. But what we did was, at 131, gave us a new discretionary allocation of 6,424,179. And so if I use that number plus our new anticipated carryover, that gives us an ending balance of 100,000. No, let me rephrase that. I'm getting confused now because there's too many shell games. Basically, with that new anticipated revenue, I'm anticipating an additional 235,000 in revenue. So we originally needed 138 some. It turned out to be 131 based off of Ken's entry, but we don't need that at all with that additional 235.
But then Sheriff, am I not correct in saying we would then be pulling out 131 from the expense, or sorry, from the revenue line? In addition to adding the 235, or the, sorry, 235.
Who's the second?
Can I just?
Ken, do you have
ask for-
something?
Can I ask for a 30-minute recess, to kind of take a break, because I feel like there's a lot of numbers being thrown around, and these are several very large tasks that you're gonna be asked to consider. And instead of me scrambling and trying to, I'm hearing numbers being kind of floated about, I want to make sure that I'm presenting the committee with,
Okay.
you know, I want to run a check on these numbers.
Yeah.
I didn't have time to look at this. So I guess I'm falling back to my original request from
Sure.
a while back, that maybe we can take a half-hour
Okay.
recess,
How long do you need?
30 minutes.
So you're not.
All right. So at
Sorry.
2:10.
I know you've been
No.
patient.
We'll recess till 2:10?
I sent you the
Is that
updated
correct?
numbers that I made, so you can pull that up and
You can-
let me know if those match what you have.
Okay.
Thanks, Sheriff. We'll see you in a minute.
2:10.
Yeah.
All right. We'll recess for till 2:10.
So taking the break will actually save us time, I suspect.
So you can eat.
We're still running.
Okay.
Are we
Thank
gonna
you
stay
for that
running
So,
for
reminder.
30 minutes?
How much more time do we need, Ken, do you
30
think?
minutes.
Oh.
I just
Come
called
back.
audio.
For the rest of
This
it?
is it. I think
You
it's-
cut the
Is it
audio?
10 to 15
Well,
minutes after you get back?
Audio is still on YouTube.
Then at 2:30.
We're still. on.
Yeah.
Okay.
I'll be,
The mics
We'll be
are on.
okay. We'll be done by, okay.
Mics are on.
Thank you. I do have
I'm
work.
sorry that there's just a lot of numbers.
Thank you for your diligence,
Is
though.
the recording still going?
Huh?
Yes.
Why don't we shut it
You
off?
know, we are
Take a
casual,
break
business
and let
casual
the
now,
second recording go.
but I gave all my staff jeans, comfortable clothes until this is over. They're thrilled with it.